It began with an army that had learned the hard way, through retreat, loss, and the quiet humiliation of being pushed back across ground it believed it could hold. Before it ever became a symbol of momentum, Eighth Army was an army searching for belief. In the early years of the Desert War, it had advanced and fallen back again and again, fighting across sand and stone, where victory vanished as quickly as it appeared. The desert did not forgive mistakes. Neither did the enemy. By the time Bernard Montgomery took command, the situation was fragile. Morale was uneven, confidence was brittle, and the Axis advance threatened everything behind the line: Egypt, the Canal, and the lifeline of an empire stretched across the globe. Montgomery did not arrive promising miracles. He arrived promising clarity. The Eighth Army would not attack until it was ready. It would not retreat unless forced. And it would fight according to a plan everyone understood. In a war defined by uncertainty, that alone mattered. Montgomery reshaped the army deliberately. Training intensified. Command structures were tightened. Defensive positions were strengthened. The Eighth Army was told exactly where it stood, exactly what it would do, and exactly why it mattered. There would be no improvisation born of panic, only preparation layered upon preparation. The desert became a classroom, minefields were mapped carefully, artillery coordination was drilled relentlessly. Infantry, armor, and engineers learned to move as one. When the fighting resumed, it did so on ground chosen deliberately. At El Alamein, the desert narrowed. There was no room left to retreat. And this time, the Eighth Army was ready to stand. The battle did not unfold quickly. It unfolded methodically. Artillery spoke first, not in desperation, but in controlled weight. Infantry advanced through minefields under fire, guided by training that had replaced instinct. Engineers worked forward under pressure, opening paths through obstacles designed to kill them. Tanks followed only when the ground had been prepared. This was not a war of daring thrusts. It was a war of endurance. The Axis forces fought hard, but they were stretched thin. Supplies were limited. Fuel was scarce. Every loss hurt more than the last. The Eighth Army absorbed punishment, held its line, and pushed forward without chasing illusions of speed. When the breakthrough finally came, it did not feel sudden. It felt earned. From that moment on, the Desert War changed direction permanently. The Eighth Army advanced westward, across ground it had once retreated from, through Libya, and eventually into Tunisia. Each mile forward carried the weight of everything that had come before. But the story of Montgomery's Eighth Army is not only a story of victory. It is a story of transformation, an army that learned to trust itself again, an army that replaced reaction with preparation, an army that proved morale and method could matter as much as numbers and machines. The desert campaigns reshaped how the British Army fought for the rest of the war. They showed that leadership could restore confidence without theatrics, and that patience could be a weapon when wielded deliberately. Tonight, we return to that long arc, from uncertainty to resolve, from retreat to advance. From an army searching for belief to one that carried momentum across an entire theater of war, to Montgomery's Eighth Army, and the Desert War that forged it. And before we continue, I want to speak to you honestly. If you're still here, listening quietly, if these long, unhurried journeys into history help you slow down, focus, or find calm at the end of a long day, then I hope you'll consider subscribing. When you subscribe, you're not just supporting a channel. You're helping keep this kind of steady, immersive storytelling alive. If this space gives you perspective, comfort, or simply somewhere to rest your thoughts, then stay with me. Settle in. This is the story of Montgomery's Eighth Army, June 21st, 1942, the port fortress of Tobruk, Libya. British Major General Henry Cloper stands in his headquarters, staring at a radio message he cannot believe. 33,000 men under his command, enough ammunition for 90 days, enough supplies to withstand a siege longer than any in modern warfare. And yet, after just 24 hours of German assault, his officers are recommending surrender. Outside, the sound of Panzer engines grows louder. Rommel's Afrika Korps has done what most military analysts thought impossible. They've taken Tobruk in a single day. Clopper picks up the radio handset to transmit the most humiliating message in British military history. Situation shambles. Am sending envoys to negotiate surrender. Within hours, more British and Commonwealth soldiers will become prisoners than in any single day since Singapore fell 4 months earlier. But the catastrophe at Tobruk is not an isolated incident. It is merely the latest and most spectacular failure of an army that has come to define defeat. 2,800 miles away, Winston Churchill sits in the White House with President Franklin Roosevelt. The two men are discussing the shape of the war, the possibility of victory, the logistics of a second front in Europe. An aide enters the room and hands Churchill a slip of paper. The Prime Minister reads it, and Roosevelt watches his face drain of color. Tobruk has surrendered, Churchill says quietly. Roosevelt cannot hide his shock. What can we do to help? The president's concern is not merely diplomatic courtesy. The fall of Tobruk means Rommel stands just 60 miles from the Egyptian border. Beyond that lies Alexandria, the Suez Canal, and the entire British position in the Middle East. Churchill will later write that no other wartime moment struck him with such dismay, not even the fall of France. But perhaps what truly devastates him is the realization that this defeat, like all the others in the desert, stems not from lack of resources or men, but from something fundamentally broken in the army itself. The British Eighth Army, formed in September 1941, had been assembled from the Western Desert Force that had achieved spectacular early victories against the Italians. In December 1940 and January 1941, 30,000 British and Commonwealth troops had routed an Italian army 10 times their size, capturing 130,000 prisoners and advancing 500 miles in 2 months. Those victories now seemed like ancient history, artifacts from a different war. Since Rommel arrived in North Africa in February 1941, the British had lost every major engagement: Battle Axe, Crusader, Gazala, Tobruk. The names rolled off like a litany of failure. 4 different commanders had led the Eighth Army in 18 months. Cunningham, Ritchie, Auchinleck, serving double duty as theater commander, and now Gott, appointed just days ago. Each had promised to stop Rommel. Each had failed. The statistics told a story of institutional collapse. Since January 1942, the Eighth Army had suffered over 90,000 casualties, killed, wounded, captured, or missing. Tank losses exceeded 2,000 vehicles. The army had retreated over 500 miles, abandoning Benghazi twice, evacuating Tobruk, falling back across Cyrenaica and into Egypt itself. By early July 1942, British forces occupied positions at a small railway halt called El Alamein, just 60 miles west of Alexandria. Behind them lay the Egyptian capital of Cairo, the Suez Canal, and the oil fields of the Middle East. Behind them also lay complete strategic disaster. If Rommel broke through at Alamein, nothing stood between him and Suez. The Mediterranean lifeline would be severed. The entire British position in the Middle East would collapse. And with it, perhaps, the British war effort itself. But the crisis went deeper than geography or logistics. Something fundamental had broken in the Eighth Army's spirit. Officers who had been in the desert since 1940 spoke of the corrosive effect of constant defeat. Men stopped believing in their commanders, stopped trusting in their equipment, stopped thinking they could win. The army had developed what soldiers called belly aching, a pervasive defeatism, a culture of complaint, an assumption that Rommel was simply better, that the Germans had better tanks, better tactics, better leadership. This was not entirely wrong. German panzer crews did have more experience. Their tanks did have better guns, better radios, better coordination. Their commanders did show more initiative, more flexibility, more tactical creativity. But the Eighth Army's defeatism had become self-fulfilling. They expected to lose, so they made the decisions that ensured they would lose. They retreated before they had to. They failed to coordinate. They fought as separate fiefdoms, artillery, armor, infantry, rather than as a combined force. The culture of failure showed itself in 1,000 small ways. Tank commanders who refused to work with infantry, artillery officers who positioned their guns too far back to support attacks, Intelligence officers whose estimates of enemy strength grew more pessimistic with each battle. Supply officers who hoarded resources rather than pushing them forward, and everywhere, a sense that the next retreat was inevitable, that Rommel would outflank them again, that the best they could hope for was to survive long enough to retreat in good order. Desert veterans joked bitterly that they called themselves the Eighth Army, but felt more like the Eighth-Rate Army. The humor masked genuine despair. In late June and early July 1942, this despair nearly became reality. Rommel pushed forward from Tobruk, determined to complete his triumph by seizing Alexandria and Cairo. The Eighth Army fell back to Mersa Matruh, abandoned it, fell back to Alamein. In Cairo, British administrators began burning documents. Staff cars loaded with files drove to the embassy grounds, where workers fed papers into oil drums converted to incinerators. Smoke rose above the city for 3 days. Egyptians watched and understood. The British were preparing to flee. The event became known as the Flap. Some British families were evacuated to Palestine. The Royal Navy prepared to abandon Alexandria. Civilians, both British and Egyptian, began hoarding supplies, exchanging pounds for gold, making contingency plans. For a few terrible days in early July 1942, it seemed possible that British power in the Middle East, built over decades, might collapse in weeks. Churchill could not allow this to happen. His political position in London had never been more precarious. In the first week of July 1942, he faced a vote of censure in Parliament, the second major challenge to his leadership in 6 months. Members rose to question his direction of the war, his strategic choices, his selection of commanders. The debate was bitter. One member of Parliament declared that the British Army seemed incapable of defeating the Germans anywhere, on any terms. Another suggested Churchill had lost his grip on military reality. The Prime Minister survived the vote, but the numbers shocked him. 25 members voted for censure. Another 40 abstained. Over a quarter of the House had either opposed him outright or declined to support him. Something dramatic had to change in the desert, or Churchill's government might fall. On August 3, 1942, Churchill flew to Cairo to personally manage the crisis. He met with General Claude Auchinleck, who had been serving as both theater commander and Eighth Army commander since taking direct control during the crisis. Auchinleck had stabilized the front at Alamein in July, fighting a series of desperate defensive battles that had finally stopped Rommel's advance. But Churchill no longer cared about stabilization. He wanted victory, and he wanted new commanders who could deliver it. After several days of meetings and deliberations, Churchill made his decision. Auchinleck would be removed, General Harold Alexander would become Commander-in-Chief Middle East, and Lieutenant General William Gott, a desert veteran and corps commander, would take over the Eighth Army. Finally, Churchill thought, the Army would have leadership that understood desert warfare, that had fought Rommel before, that could restore British fortunes. The decision was announced on August 7th. That evening, Gott flew from Cairo back to the front in an unescorted transport aircraft. German fighters intercepted it. The plane crashed. Gott died trying to pull survivors from the burning wreckage. Churchill now had to choose a second time, under terrible pressure, with Rommel preparing a final offensive to break through to the Nile. The generals in Cairo offered names: Alexander, Brooke, Montgomery. Montgomery, Lieutenant General Bernard Law. Montgomery was not Churchill's first choice. He was not particularly well known outside military circles. He commanded Southeast Command in Britain, a home defense role with no combat responsibility. He was 54 years old, a career officer who had never held independent army command in battle. He had a reputation for eccentricity, self-promotion, tactlessness, and absolute refusal to tolerate incompetence or disobedience. Many senior officers found him insufferable, but he also had a reputation for thorough training, meticulous planning, and a string of successful subordinate commands going back to Dunkirk and beyond. On August 8th, Churchill approved Montgomery's appointment. On August 12th, Montgomery landed in Cairo, 24 hours earlier than scheduled. He did not stop in the city. He did not report to Alexander's headquarters. He went straight to the desert, to the army that nobody wanted, the army that had become synonymous with failure. Within 72 hours, he would begin transforming it into something no one could have imagined. August 13th, 1942. A British staff car kicks up dust as it approaches 8th Army headquarters near Burg el Arab, 20 miles west of Alexandria. The sun beats down on scattered tents and camouflaged vehicles. Officers and staff expect their new commander to arrive tomorrow, August 14th, allowing time for the ceremonial handover of command from Auchinleck. Instead, Montgomery steps out of the car a full day early, wearing standard battle dress and carrying a small canvas bag. No ceremony, no formal welcome. He catches everyone unprepared, which is precisely what he intends. Within 10 minutes of arrival, he has already violated several protocols and made his first command decisions. He announces he is taking command immediately, not tomorrow. He cancels all existing contingency plans for further retreat. And he tells the startled staff officers that, from this moment forward, the 8th Army will never again withdraw. They will stand and fight at Alamein. If they cannot stay there alive, they will stay there dead. The officers stare at him, this stranger from England who has never fought in the desert, who knows nothing of Rommel's tactics, who seems bizarrely confident for someone commanding an army that has lost every major battle for 18 months. Montgomery is physically unprepossessing, thin, sharp-featured, with piercing gray eyes and a high-pitched voice that carries poorly in open air. He is a teetotaler and non-smoker in an officer culture built on drinking and smoking. He goes to bed at 9:30 every night and rises at dawn. He refuses social engagements, disdains small talk, and speaks with an absolute certainty that many find arrogant. But in his first hours at headquarters, something becomes clear. This man is not like previous commanders. He does not seem worried. He does not equivocate. He speaks in declarative sentences without qualification. When asked about the possibility of German breakthrough, he says flatly, "It will not happen." When questioned about his lack of desert experience, he dismisses the concern. Good generalship is good generalship anywhere. The staff officers do not know whether to be inspired or appalled. That evening, Montgomery calls together all staff officers at headquarters for his first formal address. He does not read from notes. He does not offer reassurances or appeals to tradition. He tells them bluntly that the 8th Army has been badly commanded, badly organized, and has developed terrible habits of defeatism. He says he will tolerate no more belly aching, no complaints, no excuses, no discussion of what might go wrong. He announces that corps and divisional commanders will either adopt his methods or be removed. He explains that from now on, armor and infantry will fight together, not separately. Artillery will be concentrated, not dispersed. Defense will be organized in depth with proper minefields, not strung out in linear positions. And most importantly, there will be no more retreating. If Rommel attacks, and Montgomery says he will attack soon, the 8th Army will destroy him at Alamein. The officers listen in stunned silence. Some think him delusional. Others think him exactly what the army needs. All of them recognize that something fundamental has changed. Montgomery spends his second day, August 14th, touring forward positions. He does this in a Grant tank, standing in the turret where every soldier can see him. This is revolutionary. Previous army commanders had visited the front, but rarely and usually in staff cars that whisked them from headquarters to headquarters. Montgomery goes directly to the fighting units, battalions, batteries, squadrons, and speaks to ordinary soldiers. He wears an Australian bush hat, which becomes his trademark. He gives short talks, always without notes, always with the same message. Rommel will attack, we will stop him, and then we will attack and destroy him. The soldiers are baffled. Generals do not normally speak to privates. Generals do not normally say "we" when referring to the army. Generals do not normally radiate such utter confidence. Some men dismiss it as show. Others begin to hope. All of them remember it. The transformation Montgomery begins is not merely psychological, though psychology matters. He immediately restructures the Army's organization and command relationships. The 8th Army at Alamein consists of 2 corps, 13 corps in the south, 30 corps in the north, with scattered armored divisions held in reserve. Previous commanders had allowed each corps to operate semi-independently, with armor acting as a separate force that might or might not support infantry attacks. Montgomery ends this immediately. He orders that armor will be placed under corps control. Tanks will support infantry, not operate independently. Every attack will be combined arms, with artillery, armor, infantry, and engineers working together according to a single plan. Corps commanders who resist this approach receive a simple message: comply or resign. Within the first week, Montgomery has removed or transferred 7 senior officers. The message spreads through the army. This commander means what he says. On August 15th, Montgomery issues his first written message to the entire army. It is not a routine order, but a personal communication, printed on a single sheet and distributed to every unit down to company level. Soldiers have never received anything like it before. The message is short, direct, and extraordinary in its tone. Montgomery tells them that he has come to command the Eighth Army. He has been given an order to destroy Rommel and his army. He intends to do exactly that. He tells them there will be no more withdrawal, no more retreat, no more negative thinking. He tells them they are going to hit Rommel and his army for 6, right out of North Africa. The cricket metaphor, hit for 6, resonates with British and Commonwealth troops. It means not just victory, but crushing, decisive victory. Some soldiers laugh at the optimism. Others pin the message to tent poles or tank turrets. Within days, everyone in the army is talking about the new commander who actually speaks to them, who tells them plainly what he intends to do, who seems to think they can win. The training regime changes immediately. Montgomery discovers that the Eighth Army has rarely practiced combined arms operations. Tank crews train separately from infantry. Gunners practice artillery shoots without coordinating with the units they are supposed to support. Infantry advance without proper communication with tanks. This is not how professional armies fight, and Montgomery is appalled. He orders immediate combined arms exercises. Tank squadrons practice working with infantry battalions. Artillery observers learn to call fire for both tanks and infantry. Engineers practice breaching minefields while under covering fire. The training is intensive, realistic, and sometimes dangerous, but it gives units something they have lacked for months, a sense that someone is actually preparing them to win, not just to survive. Montgomery also introduces what he calls map reading for all. Previously, only officers and senior NCOs learned to read tactical maps. Ordinary soldiers simply followed orders without understanding the larger situation. Montgomery considers this insane. How can soldiers respond intelligently to battlefield chaos if they do not understand where they are or what they are trying to accomplish? He orders that every soldier, down to the newest private, will learn to read maps, will understand the basic terrain, will know the objectives of their unit's operations. Officers resist, claiming this is unnecessary and time-consuming. Montgomery overrides them. Within 2 weeks, thousands of soldiers are attending map-reading classes. It seems like a small thing. It transforms how men think about their role in the army. The physical changes matter, but the psychological transformation matters more. Montgomery does something no previous commander has done. He makes the Eighth Army believe it can win. He does this partly through words, but more through actions. He shows himself constantly. He visits units at every level, often arriving unannounced. He speaks to soldiers in small groups, asking about their equipment, their training, their concerns. He listens to complaints, but tolerates no defeatism. When a tank commander complains that German tanks have better guns, Montgomery responds, "Then we will use our tanks more intelligently." When an infantry officer worries about Rommel's tactical skill, Montgomery says, "Rommel is not a magician. He is a general, and we will beat him." The message is always the same. We are going to win. Not we might win. Not we hope to win. We are going to win. By late August 1942, less than 2 weeks after Montgomery's arrival, the Eighth Army has begun to change in ways both measurable and intangible. Measurable. 7 senior officers replaced. Dozens of junior officers transferred. New defensive positions dug. Minefields laid in organized belts. Artillery reorganized into concentrated fire plans. Supply dumps moved 20 miles closer to the front. Intangible. Soldiers begin to believe. Not all of them, not completely, but enough to change the Army's culture. Men stop talking about the next retreat. They start talking about stopping Rommel. Some start talking about attacking. Montgomery has not yet fought a battle. He has not yet proved his methods work. But he has done something previous commanders could not do. He has convinced the Eighth Army that defeat is not inevitable. In the blazing heat of an Egyptian summer, as Rommel prepares his final offensive, the army nobody wanted begins to think it might be the army that could win. August 16, 1942. In scattered camps across the Alamein position, British and Commonwealth soldiers receive an unusual document. It is a single-page message from their new army commander, addressed not to officers, but to every man in the army. Personal message from the army commander, it says at the top. Soldiers gather in small groups to read it. Some have it read aloud by their sergeants. The message is unlike anything they have received before, direct, personal, and startlingly confident. Montgomery tells them he has been given command of the Eighth Army. He explains that Rommel intends to attack, and when he does, the Eighth Army will defeat him. He promises there will be no more retreating. He asks each man to resolve to fight this battle with determination to see it through. And he signs it simply. B.L. Montgomery, Lieutenant General, Army Commander. Men fold the message and tuck it into pockets or paste it inside tank turrets. No general has ever spoken to them this way before. It feels like the beginning of something different. Montgomery understands something his predecessors did not. An army is more than its equipment and tactics. It is a living organism shaped by culture, belief, and leadership. The Eighth Army's culture has become toxic. 18 months of defeat have created institutional learned helplessness. Units operate in isolation, each concerned primarily with its own survival. Tank commanders refuse to support infantry because they fear losing tanks. Infantry officers position their men defensively because they expect to be overrun. Artillery batteries deploy too far back because they anticipate rapid retreat. Supply officers hoard resources because they assume the next withdrawal will come suddenly. None of these behaviors are individually irrational, but together they guarantee defeat. Montgomery's task is not merely to change tactics or reorganize units. It is to reconstruct the Army's entire psychological architecture. He has roughly 30 days to do it before Rommel attacks. The transformation begins with communication. Montgomery issues personal messages constantly, not dry military orders, but direct addresses to soldiers. By early September 1942, he has issued 12 different personal messages in 3 weeks. Each addresses a specific issue: the importance of combined arms cooperation, the need for offensive spirit, the requirement for physical fitness, the expectation of victory. The messages are written in plain language without military jargon. They explain not just what soldiers should do, but why they should do it. Previous commanders communicated through chains of command. Their words filtered through layers of officers until they reached troops in garbled form. Montgomery speaks directly to his army, and the army hears him clearly. Soldiers may not like everything he says, but they know what he wants and why. Physical presence matters as much as words. Montgomery travels constantly, visiting units across the entire Alamein position. In his first 3 weeks, he covers over 400 miles, speaking to thousands of soldiers. He visits not just headquarters, but forward positions, gun lines, tank loggers, supply dumps. He arrives unannounced, climbs out of his staff car or tank, and walks among the men. He asks questions. How is your equipment? What do you need? Do you understand the plan? He listens to answers, though he tolerates no defeatism. When soldiers complain about German superiority, he challenges their assumptions. When they express doubt about British tanks or tactics, he explains how proper coordination compensates for equipment limitations. His message is always the same. We have everything we need to win. We must simply use it correctly. The command culture changes dramatically. Montgomery demands what he calls the atmosphere of the dogfight. By this he means aggressive, offensive-minded leadership at every level. Commanders who hesitate, who advocate caution, who speak of difficulty rather than possibility. These men are removed. In his first month, Montgomery sacks or transfers 7 divisional and corps commanders. He replaces them with officers who share his offensive mentality. The message spreads through the army with brutal clarity. Adopt the new culture or be removed. Some officers resent this ruthlessness. They see Montgomery as an arrogant outsider who dismisses desert experience. But the soldiers notice something different. Their new commander holds officers to the same standard he demands of them. If a general fails, he goes. If a brigadier hesitates, he goes. Rank provides no protection. Performance is all that matters. The tactical revolution is equally profound. Montgomery discovers that the Eighth Army has essentially forgotten how to conduct combined arms warfare. Armor fights separately from infantry. Artillery supports neither effectively. Engineers improvise during battles rather than being integrated into planning. This is not how modern armies operate, and Montgomery is determined to fix it. He orders immediate combined arms training exercises. Tank squadrons practice working directly with infantry battalions, learning to advance at infantry pace, learning to communicate via radio and visual signals, learning to provide covering fire while infantry consolidates positions. Artillery regiments practice concentrated fire plans, massing guns to overwhelm specific target areas rather than dispersing fire across broad fronts. Engineers practice breaching minefields under fire, developing specialized equipment and techniques. The training is intensive and often dangerous. Live ammunition is used. Some soldiers are injured in accidents, but the exercises achieve what months of separate training could not. They create teams. Tank crews learn what infantry needs from them. Infantry learns what tanks can and cannot do. Gunners learn how to support mobile operations, not just static defense. Engineers learn to work with everyone. Slowly, the Eighth Army stops being a collection of separate arms and becomes an integrated force. Montgomery watches the exercises constantly, critiquing, demanding higher standards, insisting on precision. He tells officers that sloppy training produces sloppy combat performance. He tells them that every man must know his role so thoroughly that he can perform it under fire, in darkness, in chaos. The army has weeks to prepare for Rommel's attack. There is no time for gradual improvement. Everything must change immediately. Montgomery also transforms the Army's defensive doctrine. Previous commanders had defended with linear positions, thin lines of troops trying to cover broad frontages, with reserves positioned far back to respond to German breakthroughs. This approach had failed repeatedly because Rommel's panzers could concentrate force, punch through thin lines, and exploit gaps before reserves arrived. Montgomery abandons linear defense entirely. He organizes defense in depth. Forward positions hold ground, intermediate positions break up attacks, and rear positions serve as firm bases from which counterattacks can be launched. Critically, he places his armor not in distant reserve, but in prepared positions immediately behind infantry. When German tanks break through, and Montgomery assumes they will break through somewhere, British tanks will be waiting in pre-selected defensive positions, hull down behind ridges, with fields of fire already ranged. The Germans will run onto guns, not through empty space. The defensive preparations are enormous. In 3 weeks, British engineers lay over 23,000 mines in organized belts. This is not random mine scattering, but systematic barrier construction. Minefields are surveyed, mapped, marked for British forces, and integrated into defensive fire plans. Anti-tank guns are positioned in pre-selected positions with overlapping fields of fire. Infantry dig fighting positions in depth, not single trenches, but multiple connected positions. Supply dumps are organized and positioned to support sustained fighting, not rapid retreat. Forward observation posts are established with direct communication to artillery batteries. Every aspect of defense is planned, rehearsed, and checked. Montgomery visits positions constantly, questioning officers about their plans, testing their knowledge, ensuring they understand not just what to do, but why. The logistics transformation is equally important, but less visible. Montgomery discovers that the Eighth Army's supply system is a disaster. Supply dumps are positioned too far back, requiring long transport times. Resources are hoarded by individual units rather than pooled for army-wide use. There is no systematic priority for distributing supplies. A quiet sector might have ample ammunition, while an active sector runs short. Montgomery appoints new logistics officers and gives them clear instructions. Supplies must reach forward units within 36 hours, not 4 days. Priority goes to units in contact with the enemy. No hoarding, no excuses. Within 2 weeks, supply dumps move 20 miles forward. Transport is reorganized. Ammunition, water, food, and fuel flow more efficiently. Soldiers notice they receive what they need when they need it. This small change has profound psychological impact. Men who feel supported fight harder. By early September 1942, less than a month after Montgomery's arrival, the Eighth Army has transformed in ways both obvious and subtle. The obvious changes: new commanders, new tactical doctrine, new defensive positions, systematic training, improved supply. The subtle changes: soldiers walk differently, talk differently, think differently. They stop using the fatalistic humor of expected defeat. They start speaking with cautious confidence. They do not yet know if Montgomery's methods will work in combat, but they know something fundamental has changed. The Army has a plan. The Army has a commander who believes in victory. The Army has been told it will stand and fight. And for the first time in months, soldiers believe this might actually work. As August turns to September, as temperatures remain brutal and dust continues to coat everything, the army nobody wanted becomes an army that might be ready. Rommel is coming. Montgomery has promised they will stop him. In hours and days, they will discover if promises matter when panzers attack. August 30th, 1942, 11 o'clock at night. The moon rises over the desert south of Alamein, casting silver light across sand and scrub. In German positions, engines roar to life. 203 Panzers, Mark IIIs, and Mark IVs begin moving east. This is Rommel's final gamble, his last offensive, the attack that will either capture Egypt or exhaust his army trying. He has delayed as long as possible, hoping for supplies, fuel, reinforcements that never fully arrived. But he cannot wait longer. British strength grows daily. Montgomery is preparing something. Rommel knows this from reconnaissance and intelligence. He must attack now while he still has fuel for mobile operations. His plan is vintage Rommel, a feint in the north to fix British attention, then a massive armored thrust in the south, sweeping around British positions to reach the sea, cutting off and destroying the Eighth Army. It has worked before. Rommel expects it will work again. He does not yet understand that he is attacking a different army commanded by a different mind. The German columns advance in darkness, navigating by compass and moonlight. They expect to move quickly through the southern sector, punching through light screening forces, exploiting open desert to reach the coast by dawn. Instead, within 2 hours, the advance bogs down. British minefields appear everywhere. Not scattered mines, but dense, organized belts stretching for miles. German engineers dismount to clear paths. British artillery opens fire, not random harassment, but carefully planned defensive fire missions. Shells land with precision on mine-clearing teams, on stalled columns, on supply vehicles. The Germans push forward slowly, bleeding men and time. By dawn on August 31st, they have advanced only a fraction of the distance Rommel planned. Worse, they have burned through fuel at twice the expected rate, searching for routes through minefields, maneuvering under artillery fire, operating vehicles at maximum power for hours. August 31st, mid-morning, German reconnaissance reports British armor waiting on a ridge called Alamein Halfa. Rommel has expected this. Montgomery must counterattack. British commanders always counterattack. But something is wrong. The British tanks are not advancing. They are stationary, positioned hull down on reverse slopes, showing only turrets above ridgelines. German panzers maneuver to attack, and British guns open fire at extreme range. The British are not counterattacking into the open desert. They are waiting in prepared defensive positions. Rommel's tanks advance across open ground, exposed, taking fire from tanks they can barely see. The Germans try to outflank north. They run into more prepared positions. 22nd Armored Brigade in carefully chosen terrain, supported by anti-tank guns with artillery already ranged. Everywhere Rommel probes, he finds the same thing. British armor refusing to maneuver, British guns firing from fixed positions, British infantry and artillery supporting tanks, not the other way around. This is not how desert warfare works. For 18 months, British tanks have fought German tanks in open maneuver battles where superior German coordination and command usually won. Montgomery has changed the rules. He is not fighting Rommel's kind of battle. He is forcing Rommel to assault prepared positions, bleeding the Germans through attrition, refusing the fluid maneuver combat where German superiority matters most. Rommel realizes this by afternoon of August 31st, but he is committed. He cannot retreat without achieving anything. That would destroy German morale and confirm British defensive success. He must keep attacking, hoping to find a weak point, hoping the British will eventually make the mistake of counterattacking in the open. He pushes his panzers forward again and again. British tanks fire, withdraw slightly, reappear in new positions. German tanks chase, take casualties, gain little ground. September 1st, 1942. Rommel's supply situation becomes critical. His trucks are strung out for miles across the desert, easy targets for British aircraft. The Royal Air Force Desert Air Force flies over 1,000 sorties in a single day. Fighters strafing supply columns, bombers hitting concentrations of vehicles, reconnaissance aircraft spotting every German movement and calling down artillery fire. German soldiers have never experienced air attack on this scale. The Luftwaffe is outnumbered and outperformed. British aircraft dominate the sky, attacking with near impunity. German supply columns burn, fuel trucks explode, ammunition carriers detonate. By evening of September 1st, Rommel's chief logistics officer reports they have less than half the fuel needed to continue offensive operations. Without fuel, panzers cannot maneuver. Without maneuver, they cannot exploit breakthroughs. Without exploitation, there is no point in attacking. Montgomery watches the battle from his headquarters, receiving reports every 30 minutes, tracking German movements on large situation maps. He does exactly what he told his commanders he would do. Nothing precipitous, no dramatic counterattacks, no risky maneuvers. Simply hold positions, inflict casualties, let Rommel exhaust himself against prepared defenses. Churchill sends urgent messages from London demanding action, demanding counterattacks, demanding pursuit. Montgomery ignores them. He has told his staff that British armor will not leave prepared positions until he is certain of success. That moment has not arrived. Let Rommel attack. Let him burn fuel. Let him take losses. Time favors Britain. Every hour that passes, British strength grows, while German strength declines. September 2nd, 1942. Rommel makes one final attempt, trying to swing north around Halfa Ridge. German armor runs into the 22nd Armored Brigade again, now reinforced and resupplied. The British tanks are exactly where they were 2 days ago, in exactly the same defensive positions. They have not advanced and will not advance. Rommel's panzers attack and take fire from prepared positions. They attempt to flank and run into anti-tank gun screens. They call for Luftwaffe support and get almost none. The few German aircraft that appear are immediately engaged by British fighters. By afternoon, Rommel accepts reality. He cannot break through. He cannot achieve his objectives. He must withdraw or risk losing his entire mobile force to fuel starvation and air attack. That evening, he gives the order, pull back. September 3rd, 1942. German columns begin retreating westward, expecting British pursuit. British armor does not pursue. Infantry does not attack. Artillery harasses the withdrawal, but does not mass for annihilation strikes. Montgomery refuses to follow. His corps commanders are stunned. They argue that this is the moment to destroy Rommel, that British armor must pursue, that they have the Germans beaten and vulnerable. Montgomery says no. The army is not ready for mobile operations. The men have not trained sufficiently for pursuit. Coordination in fluid combat is still imperfect. If British armor charges into open desert after Rommel, German anti-tank guns and remaining panzers will destroy them piecemeal. Better to let Rommel escape than to risk throwing away the advantage. Churchill is furious when he learns of this decision. He sends angry messages. Why no pursuit? Why allow escape? Destroy the enemy. Montgomery does not change his orders. The Battle of Alamein Halfa ends on September 7th, 1942. Final accounting shows German losses. 49 panzers destroyed, 55 seriously damaged, 1,800 men killed or wounded, enormous quantities of fuel and ammunition expended. British losses, 68 tanks destroyed, 1,700 casualties. By traditional measures, it is almost a draw. But strategically, Alamein Halfa is decisive. Rommel has attacked with everything available and failed to break through. He will never attack again in North Africa. His logistics situation will only worsen. His fuel stocks are depleted. His best troops have taken casualties. Most importantly, his aura of invincibility, the psychological advantage he has held for 18 months, is shattered. The Eighth Army has stopped Rommel, not through counterattack brilliance, not through superior maneuver, but through exactly what Montgomery promised: standing and fighting, refusing to retreat, turning the desert's fluidity into a trap. The victory transforms British morale more than the casualty figures suggest. For the first time since Gazala, the Eighth Army has fought a major battle and won. Soldiers see that Montgomery's methods work, prepared positions work, combined arms cooperation works, staying in defensive positions works, refusing to be drawn into mobile battles works. Everything Montgomery promised has happened. He said Rommel would attack. Rommel attacked. He said the army would stop him. The army stopped him. He said there would be no retreat. There was no retreat. Soldiers begin to believe not just in Montgomery's confidence, but in his competence. He has fought the Germans and won. He has done it with methodical planning and disciplined execution, not desperate improvisation. The army that stopped Rommel at Alam el Halfa is not the army that surrendered Tobruk 10 weeks earlier. It is becoming the army Montgomery promised to build. In 6 weeks, it will attack. The world will learn what happens when the Eighth Army stops running and starts fighting. September 15, 1942. Montgomery's headquarters near Burg el Arab. The army commander stands before a large map table surrounded by his corps commanders. Lieutenant General Oliver Leese commanding 30 Corps, Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks commanding 13 Corps, Lieutenant General Herbert Lumsden commanding 10 Corps. Montgomery speaks without notes for 40 minutes, outlining his plan for the decisive offensive. The operation will be called Lightfoot, ironic name for an attack involving hundreds of thousands of men. He explains that there will be no clever maneuvers, no dramatic flanking movements, no Rommel-style dashes into the enemy rear. Instead, the Eighth Army will do something the Germans think impossible. It will smash directly through Rommel's fortified positions by sheer weight of firepower, methodical execution, and sustained pressure. The attack will last 12 days, Montgomery says. 12 days of continuous fighting. The Corps commanders exchange glances. 12 days? Previous offensives had been planned for breakthrough in 2 or 3 days. Montgomery continues. This will not be a breakthrough battle, but a crumbling operation, destroying German units piece by piece until the defensive system collapses. It will be brutal, it will be costly, and it will win the war in North Africa. The scale of Montgomery's planning is unprecedented in British desert warfare. Every division receives detailed written orders specifying exact objectives, timelines, and responsibilities. Every brigade receives maps showing their routes, obstacles, and targets. Every battalion receives fire support plans detailing which artillery batteries will support them and when. Every company receives diagrams of their assembly areas, start lines, and objectives. The planning descends to extraordinary detail. Engineers know exactly which minefields they will breach and what equipment they will use. Artillery officers know exactly when they will fire and on what coordinates. Infantry officers know exactly which companies will lead assaults and which will consolidate gains. Nothing is left to improvisation or initiative. Montgomery is designing a battle the way an engineer designs a machine, with every component specified and every action timed. Intelligence preparation is equally thorough. British intelligence officers have been mapping German positions for weeks using aerial reconnaissance, prisoner interrogation, and patrol reports. By early October, they have created extraordinarily detailed maps showing every German minefield, every strong point, every artillery position, every suspected tank location. The maps are so precise that British officers can see individual weapon pits. This intelligence comes from multiple sources: reconnaissance aircraft, photograph, defensive positions daily. Patrols probe German lines nightly. Signals intelligence tracks German radio communications. Prisoner interrogations reveal unit identifications and defensive schemes. The intelligence staff synthesizes this into complete pictures of German defensive organization. On October 6th, Montgomery's intelligence chief briefs him on enemy dispositions. Montgomery studies the maps for an hour, asking questions about specific positions, testing assumptions, ensuring he understands German defensive doctrine. By mid-October, he knows German positions better than some German commanders. Logistics preparation is staggering. Montgomery demands resources on a scale not seen since World War I. He requires 2.5 million artillery shells, stockpiled before the attack begins. Previous desert offensives had used 500,000 shells. Montgomery wants 5 times that amount. Why? Because he intends to pulverize German positions with artillery fire more intense than anything seen in North Africa. He requires 1,000 tanks assembled, maintained, and positioned for the offensive. He requires 20,000 tons of supplies: ammunition, fuel, food, water, medical stores, moved forward to supply dumps within 10 miles of the front. He requires 500 miles of telephone cable laid for communications. He requires thousands of tons of engineering stores for mine-clearing operations. The logistics officers initially say this is impossible. Montgomery tells them it is necessary. Therefore, it will be done. By October 20th, everything is in position. The training regime intensifies through September and October. Units practice their specific battle tasks repeatedly. Infantry battalions rehearse night advances with white tapes marking paths through mock minefields, using compasses and pace counting to maintain direction in darkness. Tank squadrons practice coordinating with infantry, learning to advance at walking pace, learning to provide covering fire without running ahead. Artillery regiments practice massed fire plans, learning to concentrate hundreds of guns on single targets, learning to shift fire rapidly as attacks develop. Engineers practice mine clearing with new equipment: electronic mine detectors, specialized tanks with rollers and flails, even sappers using bayonets to probe for mines. The rehearsals are exhausting and dangerous, but they build muscle memory and confidence. Deception operations run parallel to real preparations. Montgomery approves an elaborate plan to convince Rommel the main attack will come in the south, not the north. British engineers build dummy tank parks in southern sectors, using plywood and canvas to create false Sherman tanks. Supply dumps in the south are expanded visibly, while real northern dumps are camouflaged. Radio traffic increases in southern units, while northern units maintain radio silence. Dummy pipelines are constructed leading south, suggesting the British are preparing for deep exploitation in that direction. The deception succeeds brilliantly. By late October, German intelligence believes British armor is concentrated south of Ruvesat Ridge, preparing to attack through Deir el-Munasib toward German supply lines. In reality, British armor is massed in the north, preparing to support infantry breakthrough at Kidney Ridge and Materia Ridge. Rommel will defend the wrong sector. The arrival of American equipment transforms British capabilities. In early October, 600 new Sherman tanks arrive from the United States, along with 100 self-propelled guns and thousands of trucks. The Shermans are revelation. They carry 75mm guns that can penetrate German armor at reasonable ranges. They have better armor protection than British Crusaders and more reliability than earlier American Grants. Most importantly, they arrive in quantity. Montgomery can now field armored divisions with standardized equipment instead of hodgepodge mixtures of British, American, and captured tanks. The Sherman crews train intensively for 3 weeks, learning their vehicles, practicing gunnery, integrating with infantry. By late October, 3 armored divisions are equipped primarily with Shermans. For the first time in the Desert War, British armor has qualitative and quantitative superiority. Air superiority reaches overwhelming levels by October. The Royal Air Force Desert Air Force fields 1,500 aircraft, fighters, bombers, reconnaissance planes, against 350 Axis aircraft. British fighters sweep German aircraft from the sky. British bombers pound Axis supply lines, hitting ports, roads, and airfields. British reconnaissance planes photograph everything, providing intelligence that feeds into targeting decisions. Montgomery coordinates closely with Air Marshal Arthur Conyngham, commanding the Desert Air Force. They establish joint headquarters, sharing intelligence and planning. When the offensive begins, British aircraft will have designated roles. Fighters will protect ground forces from Luftwaffe attack. Bombers will hit German artillery and supply dumps. Reconnaissance planes will track German movements and call down artillery fire. This level of air-ground cooperation is unprecedented in desert warfare. On October 19th, Montgomery gives his final briefing to all officers down to company commander level. Over 400 officers crowd into a tent, sitting on the ground, listening as their army commander explains the plan in detail. He shows maps, diagrams, and timetables. He explains Phase 1, infantry breakthrough in the north, creating corridors through German minefields. Phase 2, armor passing through corridors to engage German tanks. Phase 3, crumbling operations, attacking German positions systematically while preventing reinforcement. Phase 4, final breakthrough when German strength collapses. He tells them the battle will last 12 days minimum, possibly longer. He tells them casualties will be heavy, perhaps 13,000 men in the first week. He tells them the battle will require determination, courage, and discipline, and he tells them they will win. The officers listen in silence. Some are skeptical about the 12-day estimate. Some worry about the casualty projections. But all of them understand that this offensive will be unlike anything attempted before in the desert. October 22nd, 1942. Final rehearsals. Infantry units practice night advances across measured ground, learning to maintain formation in darkness. Sappers practice marking mine-free corridors with white tape every 10 yards. Tank crews conduct final maintenance checks. Artillery crews check gun alignment and ammunition stocks. Supply personnel move forward final loads of shells, fuel, and rations. Medical teams prepare aid stations and casualty evacuation routes. Engineers position bridging equipment and mine-clearing tools. Every unit performs final checks, radios tested, weapons cleaned, maps distributed, objectives reviewed. Montgomery tours forward units one last time, speaking to soldiers, answering questions, radiating confidence. That evening, as sun sets over the Mediterranean, 150,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers prepare for battle. They do not know if Montgomery's plan will work. They do not know if 12 days is accurate or optimistic. They do not know if they personally will survive. But they know they are prepared better than any British army in this war. They know their commander believes in victory. And they know that tomorrow night, the Eighth Army stops defending and starts attacking. At 9:40 p.m. on October 23rd, 1,000 guns will fire together. The largest British offensive since the Somme will begin. Rommel's fortified positions will face methodical destruction. The perfect battle, perfectly planned, will meet the imperfect reality of combat. October the 23rd, 1942, 9:40 p.m. The sky above El Alamein erupts. 1,000 British guns fire simultaneously in the largest artillery barrage since the First World War. The sound is not individual explosions, but a single continuous roar that vibrates through the ground, through the air, through the bodies of every man for 20 miles in every direction. Gunners work in mechanical rhythm. Load, fire, 4 rounds per minute, sustained for 20 minutes. 20,000 shells land on German and Italian positions in the first 5 minutes. Strong points disappear in eruptions of sand and fire. Communication trenches collapse. Ammunition dumps detonate. Men crouch in bunkers, hands over ears, praying for survival. German artillery attempts counter-battery fire, but cannot locate targets through dust and smoke. British guns continue firing, methodically working through target lists prepared weeks in advance. At 10 p.m., the barrage lifts, moving forward in planned increments. Behind it, 50,000 infantry rise from positions and begin walking forward into darkness. Operation Lightfoot has begun. The lead infantry battalions advance behind white tape corridors, marked by sappers hours earlier. Each man walks in single file, following the soldier ahead, maintaining direction by compass, bearing, and pace counting. The night is filled with noise, artillery overhead, machine gun fire ahead, the crump of mortar bombs, the screams of wounded men. But the advance continues. Units reach their first objectives at 11 p.m. Forward German defensive positions, now cratered and burning. Survivors emerge from bunkers, hands raised. British troops push through, leaving prisoners for follow-up units, continuing towards second objectives. Behind them, engineers work frantically to breach minefields. German mines are everywhere, far denser than intelligence predicted. Sappers probe with bayonets, mark mines with white tape, clear narrow paths. The work is slow and deadly. Mines detonate, killing engineers. German artillery targets mine-clearing teams. But the work continues. Because without cleared corridors, armor cannot advance. And without armor, the breakthrough cannot succeed. By 2 a.m. on October 24th, the situation becomes clear. The plan is working, but slower than expected. Infantry has seized most Phase 1 objectives, forward positions along a 10-mile front, penetrating 3 to 4 miles into German defenses. But mine clearing has fallen behind schedule. The corridors are not complete. Armor waits in massive traffic jams, hundreds of tanks idling in darkness, unable to pass through narrow gaps, still being cleared by engineers under fire. Montgomery receives reports at headquarters and makes his first decision. Armor will advance at first light through whatever corridors exist. Even if mine clearing is incomplete, risks must be taken. The plan requires armor to engage German panzers by dawn, preventing German counterattacks on infantry holding exposed positions. At 5 a.m., lead tank squadrons begin moving forward through corridors, watching for mines, listening for explosions, praying they stay on cleared paths. October 24th, dawn. The battle expands. 9th Australian Division attacks along the coast, pushing toward a position called Kidney Ridge. 51st Highland Division assaults Miteria Ridge in the center. 2nd New Zealand Division advances in the south. Everywhere, infantry fights desperate close quarters, battles for strong points. Concrete bunkers, weapon pits, defensive positions dug into rocky outcrops. German and Italian troops resist with determination. They are well-trained, well-positioned, and fighting from prepared defenses. British casualties mount rapidly. Companies that began with 120 men report 50 or 60 effectives by midday. Battalions lose half their strength in 6 hours. Medical stations overflow with wounded. But the attacks continue. Montgomery has told his commanders to expect heavy losses. He has told them the battle will last 12 days. This is day 1, October 25th. The pattern establishes itself. British infantry attacks German positions systematically, capturing strong points one by one. German counterattacks attempt to recapture lost ground. British artillery concentrations break up German attacks before they reach objectives. British armor engages German panzers in grinding attrition battles, neither side achieving decisive advantage. Both armies bleed. By October 26th, British casualties exceed 13,000, the number Montgomery predicted for the entire first week. Tank losses reach 200 vehicles destroyed or disabled. Corps commanders report exhaustion in assault divisions. Montgomery's chief of staff suggests pausing operations to reorganize. Montgomery refuses. He issues new orders: continue attacking, rotate fresh divisions into the line, maintain pressure everywhere, give Rommel no respite. The crumbling continues. October 26th to October 30th. The battle enters its brutal middle phase. Australian troops fight for a position called Thompson's Post, a cluster of strong points north of Kidney Ridge. The fighting lasts 4 days and nights. Australians attack, Germans counterattack, positions change hands 3 times. Artillery from both sides pounds the position continuously. Neither side will yield. Similar battles occur across the entire front. British names for these battles become legend. Snipe, where a single anti-tank gun company destroys 35 German tanks in 12 hours before being overrun. Woodcock, where British armor attempts breakthrough and loses 50 tanks to German anti-tank guns. Supercharge, a massive renewal of offensive operations on November 2nd, when casualties and exhaustion have brought previous attacks nearly to halt. Each position, each attack, each counterattack produces its own catalog of horror and heroism. Rommel is absent when the battle begins. He has returned to Germany for medical treatment, leaving General Georg Stumme in temporary command. Stumme dies of a heart attack on October 24th while visiting forward positions under artillery fire. His body is found beside his vehicle hours later. Rommel flies back immediately, arriving October 25th to find his defensive system buckling. He throws his reserves into counterattacks, attempting to restore positions. But British artillery dominates. Every German movement draws massed fire from hundreds of guns. Rommel's panzer divisions bleed away their strength in futile counterattacks against prepared British positions. By October 28th, he realizes the truth. He cannot win this battle. He can only delay defeat. He requests permission to withdraw from Hitler. Hitler refuses. Victory or death. Rommel must continue fighting with depleting resources, dwindling ammunition, no hope of reinforcement. The Italian contribution to Axis defense is often forgotten, but crucial. Italian Ariete Division, Trento Division, Bologna Division, these formations fight with determination, despite inadequate equipment. Italian anti-tank guns knock out British tanks. Italian infantry holds positions under sustained bombardment, but they are fighting a losing battle. British firepower is overwhelming. Italian artillery has insufficient ammunition. Italian tanks are obsolete. Italian supply lines barely function. By late October, Italian divisions have been shattered. Survivors retreat or surrender. British soldiers, expecting easy victory over Italians, find themselves surprised by Italian resistance. One British officer reports after capturing an Italian strongpoint, "They fought like lions." But courage cannot overcome material disparity. The Italians die in their positions or march into captivity. November 2nd, 1942. Montgomery launches Operation Supercharge, his last major offensive thrust. He has rotated fresh divisions into the line. 2nd New Zealand Division, 8th and 9th Armored Brigades, 4th Indian Division. They attack at 1 a.m. with massive artillery support, attempting to smash through remaining German positions at Tel el Aqaqer. The attack initially succeeds, opening a gap in German lines, but German anti-tank guns destroy British tanks by the dozen. 8th Armored Brigade loses 75 tanks in 3 hours. 9th Armored Brigade loses 102 tanks out of 128, over 80% casualties. The breakthrough stalls. Montgomery orders continued attacks. More tanks burn, more men die. The casualty lists grow longer. In London, Churchill receives reports and grows anxious. Has Montgomery's offensive failed? Has this become another Somme, grinding attrition without result? November 3rd, 1942. The German defense cracks. Not dramatically, not with visible collapse, but incrementally as Rommel runs out of everything. Out of fuel to move panzers, out of ammunition for counterattacks, out of reserves to plug gaps, out of hope. British pressure has been relentless for 12 days, exactly as Montgomery predicted. German casualties exceed 30,000. Tank losses exceed 300 vehicles. Italian divisions have ceased to exist as fighting formations. Rommel has nothing left except the choice between annihilation and retreat. On November 3rd, he chooses survival. He orders withdrawal despite Hitler's explicit command to hold positions. German engineers prepare demolitions. Remaining panzers form rear guards. Italian units without transport are abandoned. Officers tell them to surrender or walk. By evening of November 3rd, German columns begin pulling back westward along the coast road. The Battle of El Alamein is over. The Eighth Army has won. But the victory has cost 500 British tanks, 13,500 casualties, 12 days of grinding horror. Montgomery's predictions were accurate. The perfect battle was perfectly brutal. November 4th, 1942. Dawn. British reconnaissance patrols probe forward into positions held by Germans the previous evening. They find abandoned strongpoints, empty trenches, scattered equipment. German main forces have withdrawn during the night. The breakthrough has finally occurred, not through dramatic rupture, but through German exhaustion. Montgomery receives the news at 6 a.m. His staff officers wait for orders. Pursue aggressively, launch armored exploitation, cut off Rommel's retreat. Montgomery studies situation maps for 20 minutes, then issues careful instructions. Armor will advance, but not recklessly. Infantry will consolidate positions. Supply lines will be secured before deep exploitation begins. The pursuit will be methodical, controlled, careful. Staff officers are stunned. This is the moment they have been fighting for. The enemy in retreat, vulnerable, ripe for destruction. Montgomery's caution seems inexplicable, but he has his reasons, and he does not need to justify them to subordinates. British armor begins advancing westward at 9 a.m. on November 4th. 1st Armored Division, 7th Armored Division, 10th Armored Division, 3 divisions with over 400 tanks moving in pursuit. They advance 30 miles the first day, meeting only scattered resistance from German rearguards. Abandoned vehicles litter the road. Supply dumps burn. Wounded Germans unable to retreat wait for capture. But the main German force stays ahead. Rommel has organized a fighting retreat, leapfrogging rearguards, maintaining formation despite chaos. His troops are exhausted, depleted, desperate. But they are not destroyed. They retreat in units, under command, with discipline. This is not the route British forces hoped for. November 5th. British pursuit continues but at frustratingly slow pace. Armor advances, then stops to consolidate and resupply. Infantry follows hours behind armor. Supply columns move forward but require time to navigate congested roads. The advance covers 25 miles. German rearguards fight brief delaying actions, then withdraw before British forces can surround them. Rommel maintains cohesion despite massive losses. He has 30,000 men remaining from the 104,000 who defended at Alamein. He has 80 operational tanks from 500. But these forces remain organized, responsive to command, capable of fighting. They are beaten, but not broken. November 8, 1942. British forces approach Mersa Matruh, a coastal town previously held by Eighth Army, then lost, now being recaptured. Reconnaissance units enter the town at dawn, expecting German resistance. They find the town empty. Germans departed 6 hours earlier, leaving intact supply dumps, abandoned vehicles, even prepared defensive positions. British soldiers loot supply stores, finding German food, German fuel, German ammunition stockpiled for defense that never occurred. The sight is simultaneously encouraging and frustrating. Encouraging because German losses are real and crippling. Frustrating because Rommel keeps escaping. British armor is always 6 hours too late, always arriving to find Germans gone, always missing the opportunity for decisive battle. Churchill's frustration in London reaches fury. He has been following the battle closely, receiving daily reports, expecting dramatic news of enemy annihilation. Instead, he hears of steady advance, cautious pursuit, methodical consolidation. On November 9th, he sends Montgomery an urgent message. Is it really impossible to get at the enemy? Montgomery's reply is crisp. I am well satisfied with the situation. German forces are in full retreat. Pursuit continues as supply permits. The exchange reveals fundamental disagreement about operational art. Churchill wants destruction, Montgomery wants assured victory. Churchill sees enemy vulnerability and demands exploitation. Montgomery sees logistical constraints and refuses to outrun supplies. Neither man is wrong exactly, but they are fighting different battles. November 11th, 1942. Weather intervenes. Heavy rain falls across the desert, the first significant rain in months. The ground baked hard during summer becomes saturated. Wadis fill with water. the desert transforms into mud. British vehicles bog down. Tanks sink to their axles. Supply trucks cannot move forward. The pursuit halts completely for 3 days. Rommel's forces use the respite to open greater distance, reaching positions near Sollum and Halfa Pass on the Egyptian-Libyan border. The rain stops on November 14th. British forces resume advance, but Rommel has gained a week's head start. The opportunity for encirclement, if it ever existed, has passed. The strategic results of Alamein are nonetheless decisive. Rommel has lost 2/3 of his army. He has lost most of his Italian formations entirely. 34,000 Italian soldiers captured or killed. He has lost irreplaceable equipment, tanks, artillery, trucks, weapons. Most critically, he has lost any hope of renewed offensive. The Suez Canal is safe. Egypt is secure. The British position in the Middle East is no longer threatened. These are genuine strategic achievements, but they fall short of the decisive victory many expected. Rommel's army exists. It retreats but fights. It will defend Libya, then Tunisia, prolonging the North African campaign for 6 more months. The question becomes, could more aggressive pursuit have ended the campaign at Alamein? Montgomery's defenders argue his caution was correct. British armor had taken enormous losses at Alamein, 500 tanks destroyed or disabled. Remaining tanks needed maintenance. Crews needed rest. Supply lines stretched across hundreds of miles of desert. Fuel was scarce. Ammunition needed replenishing. Racing into the desert after Rommel risked outrunning supplies, scattering forces, exposing British armor to German anti-tank guns in prepared positions. Rommel's genius was defensive warfare. Pursuing him recklessly was exactly what he hoped British commanders would do. Montgomery's methodical approach prevented disaster. Montgomery's critics argue opportunity was lost. Rommel was beaten, demoralized, desperate. His troops were exhausted and depleted. His supply situation was catastrophic. Aggressive pursuit might have trapped German forces against the coast, surrounded them, forced surrender. The war in North Africa could have ended in November 1942 instead of May 1943. 6 months of fighting, 6 months of casualties, 6 months of resource expenditure could have been avoided. Montgomery's excessive caution allowed Rommel to escape when boldness could have destroyed him. The debate continues among historians 70 years later, unresolved. What is certain? Rommel escapes. By November 15th, his forces have retreated 600 miles from Alamein, reaching defensive positions at El Agheila, the same position where British offensives had stalled in December 1941. The geography of North African warfare reasserts itself. Vast distances, limited roads, extended supply lines, defensive advantages for forces operating near their bases. The pursuit becomes campaign. The campaign becomes long war of advance and consolidation. Montgomery's Eighth Army will spend 4 more months crossing Libya, fighting battles at El Agheila, at Buerat, finally reaching Tripoli in January 1943. Rommel's army, though defeated at Alamein, will fight all the way to Tunisia, joining German forces there to create new defensive positions. The Eighth Army's war is far from over. Alamein was victory, decisive strategic victory. But it was not, as Churchill hoped, the end. It was, as Montgomery knew, the beginning. December 12, 1942. El Agheila, Libya. Montgomery stands at the same position where British offensive stalled twice before, once in December 1941, again in January 1942. The geography favors defense, salt marshes to the north, sand seas to the south, a narrow bottleneck in between where Rommel has positioned his remaining forces. Previous British commanders attempted frontal assaults and failed. Montgomery plans differently. He will attack frontally with 51st Highland Division to fix German attention. Simultaneously, he will send 7th Armored Division on a wide flanking march through the desert south of German positions, 200 miles through terrain considered barely passable. The plan requires precise timing, significant risk, and confidence that British logistics can support armored forces deep in the desert. It is Montgomery's first attempt at maneuver warfare, his first move beyond set-piece battles. If it succeeds, he will prove the Eighth Army can fight mobile as well as methodical battles. The flanking maneuver begins December 15th. 7th Armored Division, the Desert Rats, the Army's most experienced formation, moves south into what maps call the Sand Sea. Navigation is by compass and sun. Supply trucks follow, carrying fuel and water. The division covers 50 miles per day through soft sand, rocky outcrops, and terrain without landmarks. German reconnaissance aircraft spot the movement, but Rommel cannot reinforce his southern flank without weakening his center. On December 16th, the Highland Division attacks Alamein defensive positions directly. Germans fight stubbornly, expecting to hold as they held before. But on December 17th, 7th Armored Division appears behind German positions, threatening encirclement. Rommel withdraws immediately. His forces retreat 150 miles to Buerat, abandoning Alamein without the lengthy battle Montgomery expected. The maneuver succeeds. The Eighth Army has learned something new. The advance continues through late December and early January. British forces move methodically, clearing coastal towns, rebuilding supply infrastructure, maintaining formation. The distances are staggering. From Alamein to Tripoli, 350 miles. Every mile requires fuel, water, ammunition, food transported from Egypt. Supply trucks drive 1,000-mile round trips. Engineers rebuild bridges demolished by retreating Germans. Ports must be cleared of mines and restored to operation. The logistic strain is immense, but British staff officers have learned from experience. Supplies move forward efficiently. Units receive what they need when they need it. The Eighth Army has become not just a fighting force, but a logistical machine. January 15th, 1943. Battle of Buerat. Montgomery repeats his Alamein strategy. Frontal attack to fix attention. Flanking maneuver to threaten encirclement. This time, he uses 2nd New Zealand Division for the flanking march, sending them through desert west of German positions. The New Zealanders are ideal for this role. Tough, experienced, led by aggressive commanders comfortable with risk. They march 180 miles in 4 days, appearing behind German defenses at Buerat. Rommel, again threatened with encirclement, withdraws. His forces retreat to Tripoli, abandoning another defensive position without sustained battle. The pattern becomes clear. Montgomery has learned to use maneuver to force withdrawal without costly frontal assaults. The battles of position at Alamein have evolved into mobile operations. January 23, 1943. The Eighth Army enters Tripoli. This is the first major Axis city captured by British forces in the war, a moment of genuine strategic significance. Tripoli is Libya's capital, its main port, a city held by Italy since 1911 and by the Axis since the beginning of the North African campaign. British troops march through streets lined with civilians, some hostile, some indifferent, some cautiously welcoming. Montgomery stages a formal victory parade, tanks, trucks, infantry marching in formation through city center. Churchill flies from Cairo to witness the entry, his first visit to recaptured territory. He makes a speech praising the Eighth Army's achievement. Soldiers, exhausted from weeks of advance, clean uniforms and polish equipment for the parade. Morale reaches new heights. They have advanced 1,400 miles from El Alamein. They have driven Rommel across Libya. They are winning. But the celebration is brief. Rommel has withdrawn into Tunisia, where German forces have been building defensive positions since November. Tunisia is different terrain, not open desert but mountains, ridges, and narrow valleys. The geography favors defense. German forces in Tunisia now number over 100,000, reinforced by troops and equipment flown from Sicily and Italy. Rommel's battered army joins these fresh forces, creating a formidable defensive system. The British First Army, which landed in Algeria in November as part of Operation Torch, approaches Tunisia from the west. The Eighth Army approaches from Libya in the east. Between them, Axis forces hold the Mareth Line, fortifications built by France in the 1930s to defend against Italian attack from Libya, now turned around to face British attack from the opposite direction. March 20th, 1943. Montgomery's first assault on the Mareth Line. 50th Division attacks directly through Wadi Zigzag, attempting to breach fortifications and establish bridgehead. The attack is disaster. German defenders, dug into concrete bunkers and weapon pits, slaughter British infantry caught in the open. Artillery devastates assault companies. Anti-tank guns destroy supporting armor. By evening, 50th Division has lost 600 men and gained nothing. The assault fails completely. Montgomery realizes immediately. Direct attack on fortified positions without overwhelming artillery support and extensive preparation is suicide. The Mareth line is stronger than anticipated. Different tactics are required. Montgomery reorganizes quickly. He shifts his main effort from frontal assault to massive flanking maneuver. The New Zealand Corps, 2 divisions plus armor, will march through the Tabaga Gap, 200 miles south of the Mareth line, through terrain Germans consider impassable for large forces. While the New Zealanders execute this left hook, 30th Corps will maintain pressure on the Mareth line, fixing German attention. The plan requires moving 60,000 men and 600 tanks through narrow mountain passes, coordinating widely separated forces, and achieving breakthrough before Germans can reposition reserves. It is Montgomery's most ambitious maneuver yet. March 26, 1943. The left hook succeeds. New Zealand Corps burst through Tabaga Gap, overwhelming light German defenses, exploding into German rear areas. Rommel must withdraw from the Mareth line or risk encirclement. German forces retreat northward to new positions at Wadi Akarit, abandoning fortifications they had expected to hold for months. The Eighth Army has learned to combine its strengths, methodical preparation with bold maneuver, overwhelming firepower with operational flexibility. Montgomery's systematic approach with aggressive exploitation when opportunity appears. The army that fought set-piece battles at Alamein now fights mobile operations in mountains. The transformation is not complete. The Mareth line assault showed they can still fail when attempting unfamiliar tactics, but they adapt quickly, learn from mistakes, and find solutions. April the 6th and 7th, 1943. Battle of Wadi Akarit. This time, Montgomery prepares properly. Massive artillery concentration, 600 guns, pounds German positions for 2 hours before assault. Infantry attacks at night with extensive engineering support. 50th Division, given chance to redeem its Mareth line failure, breaks through German defenses in brutal hand-to-hand fighting. By dawn, April 7th, British forces have torn gap in German lines. Rommel withdraws again, retreating toward Tunis. The Eighth Army pursues, no longer cautiously as after Alamein, but aggressively maintaining contact, preventing Germans from establishing new defensive lines. The army has learned not just to attack, but to exploit. Montgomery's systematic training, sustained over 6 months, has produced soldiers and commanders capable of both methodical and mobile warfare. The army approaching Tunis is fundamentally different from the army that defended Alamein. It has traveled 1,400 miles, fought a dozen battles, evolved from defensive specialist to offensive force. The question now, can it cooperate with other Allied armies converging on Tunisia? Can Montgomery cooperate with other Allied commanders? The answers will prove more difficult than defeating Germans. February 14th, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. American II Corps, part of the Allied First Army, holds defensive positions in mountainous terrain west of the pass. Most American soldiers have been in North Africa less than 3 months. Most have never experienced combat. Their divisions contain recent draftees alongside regular Army formations. Equipment is new, doctrine is untested, and commanders are learning on the job. German forces, including elements of the 21st Panzer Division and 10th Panzer Division, attack at dawn. Within hours, American defensive positions collapse. Soldiers retreat in disorder. Some units maintain cohesion, others scatter. Tank crews abandon functioning tanks. Artillery batteries are overrun. By February 15th, American casualties exceed 2,500, with another 3,000 missing or captured. 183 tanks are lost. The rout at Kasserine Pass is America's first major land defeat of World War II. It is also ammunition for critics who question whether American forces can fight effectively against experienced German units. British observers at Kasserine include liaison officers from Eighth Army. Their reports back to Montgomery's headquarters are brutal. American infantry lacks aggressive spirit. American armor employs poor tactics. American artillery fails to coordinate fire. American leadership shows inadequate grip. The reports are not entirely fair. American forces were badly positioned, surprised by German attack routes and facing Afrika Korps veterans. But perception matters more than nuance. The Eighth Army, fresh from victories at Alamein and Libya, views Americans as inexperienced amateurs. Montgomery himself writes to a colleague that American forces have a great deal to learn. The comment is accurate but tactless. It establishes a pattern. British confidence bordering on condescension. American sensitivity to British criticism. The seeds of inter-allied friction are planted. March 20th to April 6th, 1943. As the Eighth Army fights at Mareth Line and Wadi Akarit, American II Corps, now commanded by Lieutenant General George Patton, conducts limited operations in central Tunisia. Patton has been appointed specifically to restore American fighting reputation after Kasserine. He is Montgomery's opposite in every way, flamboyant where Montgomery is austere, profane where Montgomery is proper, impulsive where Montgomery is methodical. Patton immediately transforms the II Corps through aggressive leadership, demanding discipline, and personal example. American forces attack at Gafsa and El Guitar, fighting far more effectively than at Kasserine, but their operations are supporting efforts, not main attacks. The primary offensive role belongs to British Eighth Army, advancing from the east, and British First Army, advancing from the west. American forces operate on the flanks, a role Patton finds humiliating. The command structure in Tunisia is complex and tension-laden. General Dwight Eisenhower commands all Allied forces in North Africa from his headquarters in Algiers. General Harold Alexander, Montgomery's superior from Egypt, serves as Eisenhower's deputy and commands ground forces. Under Alexander, Montgomery commands Eighth Army. Lieutenant General Kenneth Anderson commands First Army. Patton commands the II Corps. The structure should work smoothly. It does not. Montgomery refuses to take orders from anyone except Alexander. He submits operational plans rather than accepting assigned objectives. He criticizes Anderson's First Army tactics openly. He suggests that Eighth Army alone could capture Tunis if given priority for supplies and air support. Anderson, commanding First Army for months while Montgomery approached from Libya, resents the newcomer's arrogance. Patton despises what he sees as British condescension toward American forces. March 28, 1943. Wadi Akarit has just fallen to Eighth Army. Montgomery proposes to Alexander that Eighth Army should execute the main attack toward Tunis, relegating First Army and II Corps to supporting roles. He argues that his forces are experienced, victorious, and in position to advance rapidly. First Army, he suggests, has been stalled for weeks and lacks the offensive capability for decisive operations. The proposal is operationally logical, but politically disastrous. Anderson, commanding First Army, has been fighting in Tunisia since November. His forces have suffered 23,000 casualties battling German and Italian troops in difficult mountain terrain. Now, Montgomery, arriving late to Tunisia, proposes to take the primary role in the victory credit. Anderson protests furiously to Alexander. Alexander faces impossible choice: give Montgomery free rein and alienate First Army, or restrain Montgomery and risk losing operational effectiveness. Alexander chooses compromise that satisfies no one. He assigns both Eighth Army and First Army axes of advance toward Tunis. Montgomery will advance along the coast from the south. Anderson will advance through mountains from the west. The II Corps will protect southern flank. Neither army will have clear primacy. Resources will be divided. The decision seems fair but violates operational principles. It divides effort, complicates coordination, and ensures forces will be fighting disconnected battles rather than unified campaign. Montgomery argues against the decision, but complies. He shifts his forces north, preparing for final push. But he makes clear in his communications that he considers this a missed opportunity. That concentration of effort behind Eighth Army would have ended the campaign faster. April 20th to May 7th, 1943. The final battles for Tunisia become competition between Allied armies as much as campaign against Axis forces. First Army advances through difficult terrain, fighting for every ridge and valley. Eighth Army advances along coast, encountering prepared German positions. American forces on the southern flank conduct aggressive patrolling and limited attacks. All three forces report daily progress to Alexander's headquarters, each claiming success, each requesting priority for supplies. The competition becomes absurd. Eighth Army officers claim their formations are most effective. First Army officers cite their longer service in theater. American officers point to their rapid improvement since Kasserine. The soldiers fighting and dying care little for these headquarters disputes, but the tensions affect resource allocation and operational planning. May 6th, 1943. Tunis falls. First Army, not Eighth Army, enters the city first. Specifically, 7th Armored Division from First Army breaks through German defenses and reaches Tunis at 2 p.m. Montgomery's forces are still 30 miles south, advancing against stubborn rearguard resistance. The next morning, when Montgomery's headquarters announces 8th Army enters Tunis, it is technically true but misleading. Lead elements arrive hours after 1st Army has secured the city. The British press, more familiar with 8th Army's victories from Alamein onward, gives Montgomery's forces primary credit. 1st Army soldiers, who fought since November and suffered majority of casualties in Tunisia, feel betrayed by the narrative. The sense that 8th Army receives disproportionate recognition while 1st Army is forgotten creates lasting resentment. May 13, 1943. Axis resistance in Tunisia ends. 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrender. The largest Axis capitulation of the war to this point. Allied victory is complete, strategic, and decisive. North Africa is cleared of Axis forces. The Mediterranean is open to Allied shipping. The path to invading Sicily and Italy is clear. But the victory is shadowed by inter-Allied tensions that will not fade. American officers believe British commanders, especially Montgomery, treated them with condescension. British First Army feels overshadowed by 8th Army's publicity despite equal contribution. 8th Army believes it won decisive battles while others played supporting roles. All three views contain truth. All three create problems for future cooperation. The North African campaign ends with military victory and political complications that will haunt Allied operations for remainder of the war. July 10th, in 1943. Southeastern Sicily. British landing craft approach beaches near Syracuse in pre-dawn darkness. The amphibious assault, Operation Husky, is the largest Allied invasion yet attempted, involving 470,000 troops, 3,000 ships, and 4,000 aircraft. The 8th Army lands on Sicily's southeast coast, while American 7th Army, commanded by Patton, lands on the southwest coast. The plan assigns 8th Army the primary role, advance north to Messina, cutting off Axis retreat to Italian mainland. 7th Army will protect 8th Army's western flank. The plan reflects Montgomery's and Alexander's assessment that 8th Army is the more experienced, more reliable force. Patton accepts the subordinate role with barely controlled fury. His forces will prove otherwise. The landing succeeds with minimal opposition. Italian coastal defense units surrender quickly. German forces in Sicily number only 60,000, concentrated inland rather than on beaches. British troops push inland, capturing Syracuse by July 11th, Augusta by July 13th. Initial progress is rapid, morale is high, and victory seems assured within weeks. But Sicily is different terrain from North Africa. Instead of open desert, British forces encounter mountains, narrow valleys, winding roads carved into hillsides. Towns cling to mountaintops, each defensible, each requiring separate assault. German defenders, primarily the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division and Hermann Göring Panzer Division, fight delaying actions that exploit terrain perfectly. Every ridge becomes defensive line. Every town becomes fortress. Every road becomes killing zone. July the 14th to August 2nd, 1943. The advance toward Messina bogs down. British forces push north along coastal road and inland valleys, encountering German resistance at every defensible position. The Battle of Primosole Bridge, the fighting for Catania Plain, the slow advance toward Mount Etna, each becomes separate campaign, requiring days of fighting for miles of gain. The Eighth Army's advantages from desert warfare, mobility, concentrated artillery, tank warfare, are neutralized by terrain. Tanks cannot maneuver in mountains. Artillery struggles with extreme elevation changes. Mobility means nothing when roads are few and easily blocked. Infantry carries the burden, attacking uphill against prepared positions, taking casualties, gaining ground slowly. Meanwhile, American Seventh Army transforms its assigned supporting role into aggressive independent campaign. Patton, freed from the restrictive coastal advance, drives his forces west, then north through Sicily's interior. His troops move fast, fight hard, bypass German strongpoints, and race toward Palermo on Sicily's north coast. American infantry and armor demonstrate energy, initiative, and offensive spirit that contradicts British assumptions after Kasserine. By July 22nd, American forces have captured Palermo and half of Sicily. Patton then turns east, advancing along the northern coast road toward Messina in direct competition with British forces advancing from the south. The campaign becomes Race Between Allies. August 17th, 1943. American forces enter Messina first, 3 hours ahead of British lead elements. Patton stands in the city center, greeting arriving British troops with theatrical courtesy that barely conceals his satisfaction. The Americans have won the race. More importantly, they have proven their combat effectiveness. Seventh Army advanced farther, faster, with equivalent casualties as Eighth Army, through equally difficult terrain, against the same German defenders. American officers and soldiers feel vindicated. British assumptions about American military inferiority are exposed as arrogant nonsense. Montgomery's response is grudging acknowledgement. American forces performed well. But the damage to Anglo-American relations is real. Trust that should bind Allied armies is corroded by competition and condescension. The Sicily campaign reveals another disturbing fact. Axis forces escape. Despite Allied air and naval superiority, despite complete encirclement of Sicily, German and Italian forces evacuate 100,000 men, 10,000 vehicles, and substantial equipment across Messina Strait to mainland Italy. Allied air forces attack the evacuation ferries but cannot stop it. Allied navies approach the strait but do not interdict crossings effectively. The evacuation succeeds because Allied forces, instead of coordinating to trap Axis armies, compete to reach Messina first. Strategic objective, destruction of enemy forces, is subordinated to prestige objective, winning the race. The escaped Germans will fight in Italy for 20 more months, inflicting hundreds of thousands of Allied casualties. The Sicily campaign is tactical victory but operational failure. September 3rd, 1943. The Eighth Army crosses Messina Strait to mainland Italy, landing at Reggio Calabria. Opposition is negligible. German forces have withdrawn north, preparing defensive positions in mountain ranges that dominate Italian peninsula. The landing is anticlimax, no dramatic assault, no fierce resistance, just unopposed crossing, followed by cautious advance into difficult terrain. For soldiers who fought since Alamein, Italy feels immediately different. Sicily was hard. Italy will be worse. The mountains are higher, the valleys narrower, the roads fewer. Every geographic feature favors defense. German engineers have demolished bridges, mined roads, booby-trapped buildings. Italian civilians, traumatized by years of war and Allied bombing, offered little assistance. The advance slows immediately. September 9th, 1943. American Fifth Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Mark Clark, lands at Salerno, 100 miles north of Eighth Army positions. The landing nearly fails. German forces counterattack savagely, driving Allied troops back toward beaches, threatening to destroy the beachhead. For 3 days, the issue hangs in balance. Naval gunfire and desperate infantry fighting prevent German breakthrough. Montgomery's Eighth Army, advancing from the south, draws German reserves away from Salerno, indirectly saving the beachhead. By September 16th, crisis passes, but Salerno demonstrates what Sicily suggested. Italian campaign will be brutal, attritional, grinding warfare against skilled defenders in ideal defensive terrain. By October 1943, the Eighth Army has advanced 200 miles up Italy's Adriatic coast, fighting for every town, every river crossing, every mountain ridge. The optimistic predictions of rapid advance to Rome have evaporated. German defenders fight delaying actions with professional skill, retreating only when outflanked or outnumbered, always establishing new defensive lines farther north. Allied casualties mount steadily. The Eighth Army, which lost 13,500 men in 12 days at Alamein, loses similar numbers across 6 weeks in Italy. The casualty rates are unsustainable. Worse, the victories seem meaningless. Capturing a town means Germans retreat to next town. Crossing a river means fighting for the next river. There is no breakthrough, no exploitation, no decisive victory. Just endless advance through hostile terrain against determined defenders. December 28, 1943. Battle of the Sangro River. 78th Division attacks across the Sangro in pouring rain, attempting to break through German defensive positions and open route to Rome. The battle becomes microcosm of Italy campaign. Initial assault succeeds in crossing river under artillery cover. Follow-up forces bog down in mud. German counterattacks regain lost positions. British artillery pounds German defenses. Infantry attacks again. The battle lasts 9 days. British casualties exceed 4,000 for gain of 3 miles. The 78th Division captures a single town, Ortona, at cost that shocks commanders and exhausts troops. Montgomery visits the division after battle and sees something troubling in soldiers' eyes. Not the confidence of Alamein veterans, but exhaustion of men fighting unwinnable battle. By year's end, 1943, Montgomery understands what his soldiers already know. The Italian campaign is becoming nightmare. The Eighth Army's strengths, mobility, firepower, combined arms coordination matter less in mountains than in desert. German strengths, defensive skill, tactical flexibility, use of terrain matter more. Every advantage that made the Eighth Army formidable at Alamein has been neutralized by geography. The army is still winning tactically, still advancing, still defeating Germans in individual battles, but strategic victory remains distant, casualties remain high, and purpose becomes unclear. Soldiers who marched triumphantly through Tripoli now trudge through Italian mud, fighting for towns whose names they cannot pronounce, wondering if this campaign will ever end. The veteran army has entered its most difficult test, and Montgomery, the commander who transformed them, is about to leave. December 23, 1943. Montgomery receives sealed orders from London. He reads them alone in his headquarters caravan, the cramped mobile office he has used since arriving in Egypt 17 months earlier. The orders inform him that he will leave the Eighth Army to command ground forces for Operation Overlord, the invasion of France scheduled for spring 1944. This is the most important command in the Western Allied war effort, the operation that will determine victory or defeat in Europe. Montgomery has been selected personally by Churchill and the combined chiefs of staff. It is recognition of his success in North Africa and Sicily. It is also the end of his relationship with the army he created. He sits in silence for several minutes, then calls for his chief of staff. "I will be leaving," he says quietly. "General Leese will assume command." Nothing more, no emotion, no sentiment. But those who know Montgomery recognize the loss he feels. He spends the next week preparing formal goodbye. On January 1st, 1944, Montgomery gathers as many senior officers as can be spared from operations. He speaks to them in a cold hall in Vasto, a coastal town serving as temporary headquarters. The speech is vintage Montgomery. No false modesty. Complete confidence in what the Army has achieved, absolute certainty about future success. He tells them the Eighth Army is the finest fighting formation in the world. He tells them they have never lost a battle under his command. He tells them they will continue winning under Lys. He tells them to remember what they accomplished together. They turned defeat into victory. They drove Rommel from Egypt. They captured Tripoli. They invaded Europe. His voice, normally high and sharp, softens slightly at the end. "It has been a great honor to command you," he says. Many of the officers, hardened veterans of 2 years of combat, find themselves unexpectedly emotional. Some have served under Montgomery since Alamein. The Eighth Army is as much his creation as any military force could be. Now he is leaving. The soldiers' reactions are more complex. For many, Montgomery is the only army commander they have known. He arrived when the army was defeated and made it victorious. He spoke to them personally, visited their positions, told them they would win. His promises proved true. His methods worked. His personality, eccentric, arrogant, absolutely confident, became inseparable from their identity. They called themselves Monty's Army with pride. But other soldiers, particularly those who joined after Alamein, have more ambivalent feelings. They respect Montgomery's achievements, but find his personality grating. They appreciate his victories, but question his caution. They recognize his importance to the Army's transformation, but do not share older veterans' personal attachment. For these men, Montgomery's departure is not tragedy, but transition. January 2nd, 1944. General Oliver Lys officially assumes command. The contrast with Montgomery is immediate and deliberate. Where Montgomery was distant, forbidding personal familiarity even with senior officers, Lys is gregarious and personable. Where Montgomery communicated through formal messages and set-piece addresses, Lys visits units informally, chatting with soldiers, sharing meals with officers. Where Montgomery demanded total obedience without explanation, Lys explains his thinking, welcomes input, builds consensus. The change in command style is refreshing for some officers, unsettling for others. Lys is competent, experienced, and respected. He commanded 30th Corps under Montgomery at Alamein and through Libya. But he is not Montgomery. He does not command the same mystique. He does not inspire the same confidence. Within days, small changes ripple through the Army. Montgomery's farewell messages, posted on notice boards throughout the Army, are quietly removed per Lys's instructions. The new commander wants soldiers focused on present and future, not dwelling on the past. Montgomery's communication style, frequent personal messages to all ranks, is discontinued. Lys communicates primarily through normal command channels. Montgomery's habit of detailed operational orders, specifying exact objectives and methods, is modified. Lys gives subordinate commanders more freedom to develop their own plans within his general guidance. These changes reflect different leadership philosophy, not criticism of Montgomery, but to soldiers, especially veteran desert rats who served since 1942, the changes feel like betrayal of Montgomery's legacy. The Army's character begins shifting in ways subtle but real. Montgomery had created intensely personal relationship with the Eighth Army. Soldiers felt he knew them, cared about them, would never waste their lives unnecessarily. This feeling, more than tactical doctrine or organizational structure, explained the Army's transformation from defeat to victory. Lys, despite his considerable abilities, cannot replicate that relationship. He did not arrive when the Army was broken. He did not promise victory when defeat seemed certain. He did not make the Army believe in itself. He inherited a winning Army, which is vastly different from creating one. Soldiers respect Lys, but they do not love him the way they loved, or claim to love, Montgomery. February 1944. Combat continues with little change in operational tempo. The Eighth Army fights for Cassino, for the Rapido River, for dozens of small towns whose names will be forgotten. Casualties continue mounting. 4,000 men lost in February, 5,000 in March. The Italian campaign grinds forward with mechanical brutality, consuming divisions, exhausting soldiers, achieving incremental gains at enormous cost. Under Montgomery, soldiers had believed every battle served larger purpose, that methodical advance would lead to decisive victory. Under Lys, the purpose becomes unclear. Are they fighting to reach Rome, to tie down German divisions, to support other Allied operations? No one seems certain. The fighting continues because it continues, not because soldiers see clear path to victory. Montgomery's farewell message becomes artifact of fading era. Some soldiers keep copies, folded in pockets or pasted inside lockers. Others discard them, focusing on present realities. The message's language, "We have achieved together some of the greatest victories in the history of the British Army," seems grandiose in retrospect, perhaps embarrassingly so. But it captured something real about the Army's transformation. From defeated force in August 1942 to victorious Army in December 1943, that transformation was genuine, historically significant, and largely Montgomery's achievement. He gave the Army confidence, doctrine, victory. In return, the Army gave him immortality. He will always be remembered as the commander who saved the Eighth Army. But armies are not static. They evolve, absorb new soldiers, adapt to new circumstances. By early 1944, most Eighth Army soldiers are replacements. The desert rats who fought at Alamein are minority. New formations from Britain, British 78th Division, 4th Indian Division, reinforcements for depleted battalions, outnumber original 8th Army veterans. These new soldiers never served under Montgomery. They know him only through stories, through reputation, through the mystique that veterans cultivate. For them, the 8th Army is their current unit, not historical entity. Leese is their commander, not Montgomery. The war is Italy, not the desert. The past, however glorious, is past. Montgomery leaves for England in early January, flying from Naples to London. He does not look back at Italy or the Mediterranean. His focus is entirely forward: Normandy, France, Germany. The 8th Army, which consumed his energy and defined his career for 17 months, is already receding in his mind. He will mention it in speeches, write about it in memoirs, use its victories to bolster his reputation. But it is no longer his concern. The army he created will fight for 16 more months in Italy, then deploy to Burma for the war against Japan. It will win victories, suffer defeats, evolve beyond anything Montgomery would recognize. But for one brief extraordinary period from August 1942 to December 1943, Army and commander were perfectly matched. Montgomery needed the 8th Army to prove his methods and establish his reputation. The 8th Army needed Montgomery to transform defeat into victory and despair into confidence. That mutual need, that perfect historical moment, has passed. The Army will continue. Montgomery will continue, but they will not continue together. The era is over. February 12, 1944. Cassino, Italy. British forces of the 8th Army take over the Cassino sector from American troops who have been battering themselves against German defenses for 6 weeks without success. The town of Cassino sits at the entrance to the Liri Valley, the most direct route to Rome. Dominating the town is Monte Cassino, 1,400 feet high, crowned by a Benedictine monastery built in the 6th century AD. German paratroopers occupy positions around, not inside, the monastery, using the mountain's slopes, caves, and ruins to create defensive network of extraordinary strength. Every Allied assault has failed. American commanders now pass this nightmare to the British. 8th Army soldiers, moving into positions around Cassino, look up at the monastery and understand immediately: this will be hell. The strategic situation has become absurd. The Allies invaded Italy in September 1943, expecting rapid advance to Rome, then continued progress toward Germany through northern Italy and southern France. Churchill had called Italy the soft underbelly of Europe. 7 months later, Allied forces are stalled 60 miles south of Rome, bleeding away strength in attritional warfare that achieves nothing decisive. The Italian campaign has become a forgotten war, overshadowed by preparations for Normandy invasion scheduled for June. Soldiers fighting in Italy's mountains read newspapers full of stories about buildup in England, millions of troops, thousands of landing craft, endless speculation about invasion date. Meanwhile, in Italy, they die capturing towns whose names no one remembers for objectives that change weekly. The 8th Army in early 1944 is fundamentally different from the force that won at Alamein. Original desert veterans are minority. Most soldiers joined since Tunisia or Sicily. They know the Eighth Army's reputation, but have not experienced its glory days. For them, the Eighth Army means Italy, mud, mountains, rain, endless fighting for marginal gains. There are no dramatic tank battles, no sweeping maneuvers, no decisive victories. Just infantry attacks uphill against German positions, artillery duels in narrow valleys, engineers rebuilding blown bridges while under fire. The warfare resembles World War I more than World War II. Progress is measured in yards, casualties in thousands, victories in towns captured. February 15th, 1944. Allied commanders, frustrated by repeated failures at Cassino, make controversial decision: bomb the monastery. The reasoning? German observers must be using the monastery for artillery spotting. Destroying it will eliminate observation post and weaken German defenses. The actual situation. Germans have pledged not to occupy the monastery itself, respecting its cultural and religious significance. German positions are around the monastery, not in it. The bombing, ordered by American General Mark Clark against advice of British commanders, proceeds regardless. 229 Allied bombers drop 1,150 tons of bombs on the monastery. The ancient building, repository of priceless manuscripts and art, is reduced to rubble. German paratroopers immediately occupy the ruins, which provide better defensive positions than the intact structure. The bombing achieves nothing militarily and destroys irreplaceable cultural heritage. The battle for Cassino continues through February, March, and into April. Allied forces attack repeatedly. British, American, New Zealand, Indian, Polish troops all take their turns assaulting the German positions. Every attack follows the same pattern: intense artillery preparation, infantry assault up mountainside, initial success taking forward positions, German counterattack from depth positions, Allied forces driven back with heavy casualties. The casualty figures are staggering. British 78th Division suffers 4,000 casualties in 9 days, fighting for a single town, Ortona, in December. 2nd New Zealand Division loses 2,000 men in February assaults at Cassino. 4th Indian Division, attacking from the north, suffers 3,500 casualties, gaining 1,000 yards. Polish II Corps, joining offensive in May, loses 3,800 men, capturing what remains of the monastery. The weather makes everything worse. Winter, 1943 to 1944, is among the coldest and wettest in Italian history. Rain falls for days without stop. Rivers flood. Roads become rivers of mud. Tanks bog down and cannot maneuver. Supply trucks cannot reach forward positions. Soldiers live in conditions approaching World War I trenches: standing water, mud everywhere, cold that penetrates every layer of clothing. Trench foot becomes epidemic. Frostbite cases overwhelm medical stations. Men cannot dry their clothes, cannot warm themselves, cannot escape the mud. They sleep in water-filled foxholes, eat cold rations, and die of exposure as often as combat wounds. The misery is comprehensive. May 11th, 1944. Operation Diadem launches, the final massive assault on the Gustav Line, of which Cassino is the key position. 2,000 Allied guns open fire simultaneously in largest artillery barrage in Italian campaign. British, American, French, and Polish forces attack across entire front. The offensive succeeds not through breakthrough at Cassino, but through flanking maneuver by French forces through mountains Germans thought impassable. By May 18th, Polish troops finally capture Monte Cassino's ruins after 4 months of continuous battle. German forces withdraw to avoid encirclement. The Gustav Line collapses. Allied forces advance toward Rome. But the price: over 20,000 Allied casualties in 10 days. For the Eighth Army alone, 8,000 casualties. The battle for Cassino has cost the Allies over 50,000 casualties over 4 months for advance of 15 miles. June 4th, 1944. Rome falls to American Fifth Army. Churchill's prediction of rapid advance to Rome, made in September 1943, finally comes true 9 months late. But the victory is overshadowed by events elsewhere. June 6th, D-Day, Normandy invasion, succeeds, landing 150,000 Allied troops in France. World attention shifts to Normandy. Rome's capture, which should be front-page news, is buried inside newspapers. Italian campaign veterans feel the shift immediately. Their war has become sideshow, their victories footnotes, their casualties statistics that interest no one. They continue fighting because they are soldiers, and fighting is what they do. But the sense of purpose, never strong in Italy, evaporates almost entirely. Summer and fall, 1944. The Eighth Army fights through central Italy toward the Gothic Line, Germany's next major defensive system in the northern Apennines. The pattern continues: advance, encounter German defenses, attack, take casualties, gain ground, repeat. Towns fall: Arezzo, Florence, Perugia. Rivers are crossed: the Arno, the Foglia, the Metoro. Mountains are climbed: the hills of Tuscany, the ridges of Umbria. Each represents hard fighting, significant casualties, incremental progress. But no battle feels decisive. No victory feels important. 7th Armored Division, the famous Desert Rats, is transferred from Italy to northwest Europe in August. Veterans of Alamein, Mareth, and Sicily leave Italy without regret. Their departure symbolizes what the Eighth Army has become: training ground for northwest Europe operations, provider of experienced units for more important theaters. August 25th to September 2nd, 1944. Gothic Line offensive. The Eighth Army attacks through eastern Apennines, attempting to break through to the Po Valley and northern Italy. Initial assaults succeed in penetrating Gothic Line defenses. Indian 8th Division breaks through at Germano after 5 days of fighting and 3,500 casualties. British 1st Division captures Coriano Ridge. Canadian troops advance toward Rimini. For a brief moment, breakthrough seems possible. Then German reserves counterattack. Weather deteriorates. Supplies run short. The offensive bogs down. By September, 8th Army has advanced 15 miles, suffered 15,000 casualties, and exhausted itself without achieving breakthrough. Leese, commanding 8th Army, requests pause to rebuild strength. The request is approved. Operations halt. December 1944. The 8th Army's position: 7 months fighting since Rome's capture, advanced 150 miles through central Italy, currently holding lines south of Ravenna and Bologna, preparing for winter halt. The strategic situation: stalemate. German forces, though retreating, maintain cohesion and defensive strength. Allied forces, though advancing, cannot achieve decisive breakthrough. Italian campaign has become war of attrition with no end visible. Soldiers in forward positions receive early Christmas rations and mail from home. Letters from Britain describe excitement about war's approaching end, optimism about victory in 1945. In Italy, soldiers see nothing suggesting imminent victory. They see mud, mountains, Germans, and prospect of another winter in miserable conditions. The forgotten campaign continues, forgotten by everyone, except those fighting it. The Eighth Army, which saved Egypt and chased Rommel across Libya, now fights battles that will barely merit footnotes in history books. This is war's grim reality. Glory fades, purpose erodes, but fighting continues because there is no alternative. April 2nd, 1945, Lake Comacchio, northern Italy. British commandos and specialized armor units prepare for unusual operation. Comacchio is shallow lake north of Ravenna, separated from the Adriatic Sea by narrow spit of land. German forces consider the lake and surrounding wetlands impassable and have positioned only light forces to defend. British planners see opportunity. Attack through the lake using amphibious vehicles and specialized equipment. Outflank German defenses, open route to the Po Valley. It is exactly the kind of operation Montgomery would have planned 18 months earlier. Meticulous preparation, specialized equipment, attack where enemy least expects. But this is General Richard McCreary's 8th Army now, commanded by officer who replaced Leese in November 1944. The Army has evolved beyond Montgomery's methods without abandoning their core principles. April 9th, 1945. Operation Buckland begins. British troops cross Lake Comacchio in assault boats, while specialized fantail amphibious vehicles, tanks modified with flotation screens, swim across with infantry. The Germans are shocked. They did not believe mechanized forces could operate in the lake and wetlands. British forces establish bridgehead, expand rapidly, threaten to outflank German positions defending approaches to Bologna. This is innovation born from necessity and experience. The Eighth Army has learned to adapt, to use terrain creatively, to employ specialized equipment effectively. These are not tactics from North Africa. These are tactics developed through 3 years of warfare in varied terrain against skilled opponents. Simultaneously, main offensive launches along Eastern Front. The Eighth Army attacks through Argenta Gap, narrow corridor between flooded lands and Lake Comacchio, approaching the Po Valley and northern Italy. This is the decisive ground. Beyond this corridor lies open terrain where Allied armor and air power can operate effectively, where German defensive advantages disappear. But reaching it requires forcing the heavily defended gap. British and Polish forces attack with massive artillery support, over 1,500 guns firing in coordinated bombardment. The barrage resembles Alamein's opening, methodical, overwhelming, designed to shatter defenses before infantry attacks. Some Eighth Army veterans, serving since 1942, recognize Montgomery's fingerprints on the planning despite his absence. April 10th to 14th, 1945. The battle for Argenta Gap becomes a attritional struggle resembling earlier Italian fighting. German paratroopers and panzer grenadiers defend with familiar skill, occupying flooded fields, fortified farmhouses, and prepared positions. British infantry attacks across open ground swept by machine gun fire. Casualties mount. British 78th Division, attacking toward Argenta town, loses 1,200 men in 4 days. Jewish Brigade Group, formed from Palestinian Jewish volunteers, fights its way through German defenses in brutal house-to-house combat. Polish troops, seeking revenge for 5 years of occupation and oppression, attack with ferocity that shocks even experienced German defenders. Progress is slow, costly, and absolute. German defenders cannot retreat. Their line must hold or entire defensive system collapses. April 14th, 1945. British armor breaks through at Argenta. Tanks of 6th British Armored Division punch through weakened German defenses, emerging into the Po Valley. This is the moment the Eighth Army has fought 18 months to achieve. Mechanized forces in open terrain, German forces unable to establish prepared defenses, opportunity for exploitation and pursuit. The breakthrough releases armies, British, Canadian, Polish, New Zealand, Italian formations pour through the gap. German retreat becomes rout. Units that held cohesion for years of fighting now disintegrate. Soldiers surrender by thousands. Others flee northward without equipment, without organization, seeking only to escape capture or death. April 21st, 1945. American Fifth Army, advancing parallel to Eighth Army west of the Apennines, captures Bologna. British and American forces link up, trapping German forces between them. The German defensive system in Italy collapses completely. Marshal Albert Kesselring, commanding German forces in Italy, has conducted masterful defensive campaign for 18 months, bleeding allies through skillful use of terrain and defensive tactics. But Germany is defeated. Hitler is dead or dying in Berlin. German forces everywhere are surrendering or collapsing. Kesselring's brilliant defense has bought time for nothing. His forces now face choice: surrender or be annihilated. Most choose surrender. April 23 to May 2nd, 1945. The Eighth Army advances 200 miles in 10 days, the fastest sustained advance in its history. Verona, Vicenza, Padua, Venice, Trieste, cities fall like dominoes as German forces retreat or surrender. The speed is extraordinary compared to previous Italian operations, where 15 miles might require 6 weeks of fighting. But circumstances have changed. German morale has collapsed. German supply lines have been destroyed by Allied air power. German command structure is disintegrating as overall defeat becomes obvious. The Eighth Army exploits ruthlessly, driving forward, accepting surrenders, pushing toward Austrian border. May 2nd, 1945. German forces in Italy sign unconditional surrender, effective immediately. Nearly 1 million German soldiers lay down their arms. The Italian campaign is over. Final casualty accounting. For the Eighth Army in Italy from September 1943 to May 1945, 94,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or missing. For all Allied forces in Italy, 312,000 casualties. For German and Italian forces, over 400,000 casualties plus hundreds of thousands captured. The campaign lasted 20 months, advanced 700 miles, involved some of war's most difficult fighting, and achieved objectives that remain debated by historians 75 years later. The soldiers' reactions to victory are complex. Relief, certainly. No one will die tomorrow. No one will be wounded. No one will spend another night in muddy foxhole. But also exhaustion, numbness, anticlimax. The war in Italy never felt like the main war. It felt like sideshow to Normandy. Forgotten by home front, ignored by press, overshadowed by dramatic events elsewhere. Now it is over, and soldiers wonder what it achieved. Did fighting in Italy shorten the war? Did tying down German divisions justify Allied casualties? Was there a strategic alternative that would have ended the war faster? These questions have no clear answers. What is clear? The Eighth Army finished the war having traveled further, fought longer, and evolved more completely than any other British formation. The evolution is remarkable when measured across full span, from defeated army at Alamein in August 1942 to victorious force at Tunis in May 1943 to grinding attrition in Italy through 1944 to final successful offensive in April 1945. The Eighth Army proved capable of learning, adapting, and winning under radically different conditions. It fought in deserts, mountains, and valleys. It conducted defensive battles, set-piece offensives, mobile operations, river crossings, amphibious assaults, and pursuit operations. It integrated formations from dozens of countries, operated under multiple commanders, and maintained identity despite complete turnover in personnel. This adaptability, more than any single battle victory, defines the Eighth Army's achievement. May 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. In northern Italy, Eighth Army soldiers celebrate with whatever is available: captured German alcohol, hoarded rations, improvised music. The celebrations are genuine but restrained. These are not men who feel triumphant. They are men who feel relieved, survivors. They have done their duty, fulfilled their responsibilities, completed their mission. Now they want to go home. Many will not go home for months or years. Occupation duties, demobilization delays, redeployment to Pacific Theater for some formations. But on May 8th, they allow themselves to believe the fighting is over, that they have survived, that the nightmare has ended. In the distance, mountains of northern Italy rise toward Alps. Beyond them lies Austria, Germany, the Reich that is no more. Behind them lies Italy, Sicily, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. 3 years of warfare across 3,000 miles. The Eighth Army, in this moment, can look back at what it accomplished and forward to peace it helped secure. The war is over. The work is done. History will judge what it meant. June 6th, 1944. While Eighth Army soldiers fight through marshes approaching Rome, British soldiers of 21st Army Group storm Normandy beaches 2,000 miles north. The contrast could not be more dramatic. In Italy, grinding attrition in mountains, marginal gains measured in yards, battles that receive minimal press coverage. In Normandy, massive amphibious assault, decisive campaign to liberate France, continuous media attention from every Allied nation. The Eighth Army veterans, reading about D-Day in newspapers that reach Italy weeks late, experience complex emotions: pride that Allied forces are winning, resentment that their campaign is forgotten, confusion about why Italy receives so little attention when their fighting is equally hard, their casualties equally real. The strategic contexts are fundamentally different. Northwest Europe campaign aims to defeat Germany directly, advance through France, cross Rhine, occupy German industrial heartland, force unconditional surrender. Italy campaign, after Rome's capture, has vaguer objectives: tie down German divisions, prevent their transfer to France or Eastern Front, maintain pressure on southern Axis, potentially break into Austria or southern Germany. But tying down enemy divisions is indirect strategy that produces no dramatic victories, no clear milestones, no obvious connection between soldier sacrifice and war outcome. Men fighting in Italy understand abstractly that they are helping by preventing German reinforcements elsewhere, but understanding abstractly differs from feeling purposeful. The tactical experiences also differ dramatically. Northwest Europe offers relatively open terrain where Allied advantages in armor, artillery, and air power can be fully employed. After breaking out from Normandy in August 1944, 21st Army Group advances across France rapidly, covering hundreds of miles in weeks, fighting mobile warfare that plays to Allied strengths. Italy offers mountains, narrow valleys, limited roads where Allied advantages are neutralized and German defensive skills shine. Eighth Army advances are measured not in hundreds of miles, but dozens of miles per month, always against prepared defenses, always at high cost. Soldiers in both theaters fight bravely, but the campaigns they fight could hardly be more different. The casualty figures tell part of the story. 21st Army Group in Northwest Europe, June 1944 to May 1945, 228,000 casualties across 11 months. 8th Army in Mediterranean Theater, September 1942 to May 1945, 224,000 casualties across 32 months. Similar total casualties, but vastly different time periods. Northwest Europe produced higher casualty rates, but shorter campaign. Mediterranean produced lower casualty rates, but much longer campaign. Which was worse for soldiers? High-intensity combat for 1 year, or moderate-intensity combat for 3 years. Both were terrible in different ways. The German perspectives reveal the strategic dilemma. German commanders always considered Northwest Europe the decisive theater and Italy secondary. When Allies invaded Normandy, Germans transferred best divisions from Italy to France, leaving second-tier formations to defend Italian positions. This suggests Italy succeeded in its tying down mission. If German forces were free to transfer, they were not truly tied down. But Germans maintained roughly 25 divisions in Italy throughout 1944, even while desperately needing troops elsewhere. 25 divisions that could have reinforced Normandy defenders, or Eastern Front against Soviets, instead fought in Italy. From this perspective, Italian campaign justified itself by preventing those divisions from affecting more critical battles. Churchill's view evolved dramatically across the war. In 1943, he championed Italy as soft underbelly that would lead to rapid victory and potential advance into Central Europe ahead of Soviets. By 1944, as Italian campaign bogged down, he called it tough old gut and questioned whether resources devoted to Italy might be better used elsewhere. By 1945, facing Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, he again advocated for aggressive Italian operations to position Western forces in Austria and Yugoslavia before Soviets arrived. His vacillations reflected genuine strategic uncertainty. Was Italy worth the cost? No one knew for certain then. Historians debate still. August 25, 1944. Paris is liberated by Free French and American forces advancing across France. The same day, British Eighth Army captures Rimini after month-long battle costing 8,000 casualties. Paris liberation dominates global headlines for weeks. Rimini's capture receives brief mention in newspapers' back pages. Eighth Army soldiers, reading about Paris celebrations, contrast them with their own experience, fighting in mud, sleeping in ruins, dying for towns no one has heard of. The disparity in attention creates lasting bitterness. They are fighting same enemy, achieving same objective of German defeat. But their war is forgotten war. The media coverage disparity has multiple causes. Geography. Reporters can reach Normandy easily from Britain, while Italy is distant and difficult to access. Language. English-speaking populations care more about France, historical ally, than Italy, former enemy. Strategy. Everyone understands that France's path to Germany, while Italy's strategic purpose is murky. Command. Montgomery in Northwest Europe is media-savvy celebrity who cultivates press relationships, while Eighth Army commanders in Italy are competent professionals who avoid publicity. All these factors combine to ensure that Northwest Europe receives 10 times the coverage of Italy. The Eighth Army becomes forgotten while still fighting. March 1945. Two simultaneous operations highlight the differences. In Italy, Eighth Army prepares spring offensive through Argenta Gap, methodical planning, overwhelming artillery support, systematic advance against prepared defenses. In Germany, Montgomery's 21st Army Group crosses Rhine River. Dramatic amphibious and airborne assault, rapid exploitation, race toward Berlin. Rhine crossing is one of war's most reported operations. British newspapers devote pages to describing assault boats crossing river, paratroopers landing beyond, armor racing into German heartland. Argenta Gap offensive, equally difficult and equally important strategically, receives minimal coverage. Same British Army, different theaters, completely different public recognition. The soldier's perspective matters most. Men who served in both theaters, and some did, transferring from 8th Army to 21st Army Group, report Northwest Europe as more dramatic but shorter, Italy as more grinding but longer. Northwest Europe felt like winning. Rapid advances, German collapse, visible path to victory. Italy felt like surviving. Slow advances, stubborn resistance, no clear end in sight. Both campaigns were necessary. Both contributed to victory, but they felt entirely different to men fighting them. Final accounting compares accomplishments. Northwest Europe, liberated France, Belgium, Netherlands, crossed Rhine, occupied Western Germany, forced German surrender. Duration, 11 months. Italy, secured Mediterranean sea lanes, tied down 25 German divisions, provided airfields for bombing campaigns, opened route to southern Germany. Duration, 20 months. Which achieved more? The question is unanswerable because campaigns served different purposes. Northwest Europe was decisive campaign. Italy was supporting campaign. Both were necessary for victory, but recognition, then and now, goes to decisive campaigns, not supporting ones. The Eighth Army's fate, achieved genuine strategic success while being forgotten by public, overshadowed by more dramatic theaters, remembered primarily for battles fought in 1942 and 43 rather than longer, harder campaigns that followed. History is written by those who capture imagination, not those who do necessary unglamorous work. The Eighth Army's Italian campaign was necessary unglamorous work. That reality, more than any tactical defeat, explains why it became the forgotten campaign. August 13th, 1942. Return to this date one final time to understand the paradox. Montgomery arrives in Egypt to command an army that has lost every battle for 18 months, an army whose soldiers expect to retreat, whose commanders anticipate defeat, whose entire culture is built on learned helplessness. Within 30 days, he transforms this army's psychology completely. Within 90 days, the army wins decisive defensive victory at Halfa. Within 120 days, it wins overwhelming offensive victory at El Alamein. No other British commander in World War II achieved such rapid, complete transformation of military formation. Montgomery's methods, personal leadership, detailed planning, methodical execution, absolute confidence, worked brilliantly for this army at this moment. Yet the same methods that saved the Eighth Army also limited it. Montgomery's insistence on methodical preparation meant opportunities for exploitation were missed. His refusal to pursue aggressively after Alamein allowed Rommel to escape and fight for 6 more months. His extreme caution prevented decisive victories that might have shortened campaigns. His planning required weeks when days were available. His systematic approach won battles through attrition when maneuver might have won through annihilation. Every Montgomery strength was simultaneously a weakness. Every method that brought success also brought limitations. November 1942. After Alamein, Montgomery refuses to pursue Rommel aggressively despite Churchill's demands. His reasoning, British armor is not trained for mobile operations. German anti-tank guns will destroy tanks attempting pursuit. Better to advance methodically than risk defeat through recklessness. This reasoning is logical and defensible. It may even be correct, but it also reveals Montgomery's fundamental limitation: inability or unwillingness to exploit success. Great commanders, Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, even Rommel, share ability to sense when enemy is vulnerable and strike decisively. Montgomery never developed this instinct. He won battles through superior preparation and firepower. He never won battles through inspired opportunism or tactical brilliance. The casualty statistics reveal another paradox. Montgomery's battles produced favorable casualty ratios compared to other British commanders. At Alamein, Germans lost 30,000 casualties versus British 13,500. At Mareth, Germans lost 7,000 versus British 4,000. Montgomery preserved British lives better than most World War II commanders. Yet, his methodical approach sometimes prolonged campaigns, ultimately costing more casualties than risky exploitation might have. If aggressive pursuit after Alamein had destroyed Rommel's army in November 1942, would that have saved lives lost in 4 additional months fighting across Libya and Tunisia? The question is unanswerable but important. Montgomery's personality magnified both his successes and failures. His absolute confidence inspired soldiers but alienated peers. His certainty about his methods won battles but prevented adaptation. His willingness to ignore superiors when he disagreed protected his army from foolish orders but damaged coalition relationships. His self-promotion secured his reputation but created resentment among other commanders. He was simultaneously the right commander for the Eighth Army and a difficult commander to work with. The paradox was never resolved because it was fundamental to his character. The German assessment is revealing. After war, German generals were interviewed about Allied commanders. Most rated Patton as most dangerous, describing him as aggressive and unpredictable. They rated Montgomery as competent but cautious, describing him as methodical and predictable. Field Marshal Kesselring said, "Montgomery never attacked until absolutely certain of success. This made him difficult to defeat, but also meant we knew what to expect." Rommel wrote in his diary after Alamein, "Montgomery is not a genius, but he is professional and thorough. He makes no mistakes because he takes no risks." These are not insults, but neither are they accolades reserved for great commanders. The counterfactual questions haunt Montgomery's reputation. What if more aggressive commander had taken over Eighth Army in August 1942? Might faster victories have been achieved? Or might British forces have been destroyed, attempting operations they were not ready to execute? What if Montgomery had pursued more aggressively after Alamein? Could war in North Africa have ended 6 months earlier? Or would British armor have been destroyed by German anti-tank guns, allowing Rommel to regroup? These questions cannot be answered with certainty, but they must be asked when evaluating Montgomery's generalship. Montgomery's own assessment of his methods never wavered. In post-war memoirs and interviews, he defended every decision, claimed perfect record, and attributed all successes to his systematic approach. He never acknowledged that caution might have costs as well as benefits. He never admitted that more aggressive exploitation might have shortened campaigns. His certainty, which inspired soldiers during war, became off-putting in peace. Soldiers who served under him described this with mixed feelings. They appreciated his confidence during war. They found his self-congratulation excessive afterward. The soldier loyalty remains Montgomery's strongest vindication. Polls of Eighth Army veterans in 1950s and 60s showed overwhelming positive assessment. 87% rated him excellent or good as commander. Only 5% rated him negatively. These are remarkable numbers, suggesting that soldiers who actually served under Montgomery respected his leadership regardless of later historical debates. They remembered that he arrived when they were defeated and left when they were victorious. They remembered that he promised victory and delivered it. They remembered that he seemed to care about their lives, that he visited them personally, that he communicated directly rather than through chain of command. For veterans, these memories outweighed academic debates about optimal strategy. The final assessment, must recognize Montgomery's achievement while acknowledging his limitations. He saved the Eighth Army when it was broken. He gave it confidence, doctrine, and victories. He transformed British military culture from defeatist to victorious. These are genuine, historically significant achievements, but he also prevented the Eighth Army from reaching its full potential. His excessive caution limited exploitation opportunities. His rigid methods prevented tactical flexibility. His difficult personality damaged Allied cooperation. A perfect commander would have combined Montgomery's thoroughness with greater boldness. But perfect commanders do not exist. Montgomery was the commander the Eighth Army needed at the moment it needed him. That he was not perfect does not diminish that achievement. The paradox remains, his greatest strengths were his greatest weaknesses. His methods saved the army, but also limited it. He was simultaneously exactly right for the moment and insufficient for what followed. History's judgment must embrace the paradox rather than resolve it. Montgomery was great commander with serious limitations. The Eighth Army triumphed because of him and despite him. Both are true. October 24th, 1942, 2 a.m. An Australian private named Jack Williams lies in a shallow trench south of Kidney Ridge, waiting for the order to advance. He is 22 years old, from Sydney, a dock worker before the war. Around him, men from his company prepare weapons, check ammunition, smoke final cigarettes. They can hear the artillery barrage ahead, 1,000 guns firing continuously for 4 hours now. The ground shakes, the air tastes of cordite. Williams has been in the desert for 6 months, but has never experienced anything like this. In 3 minutes, his company will rise and walk forward into German defensive positions. He knows the statistics. 1 in 3 men in the first wave will be casualties. He wonders if he will be the lucky 2 or the unlucky one. The whistle blows. He stands. He walks forward into darkness, into fire, into history. Williams survives October 24th, and October 25th, and the entire Battle of El Alamein. He fights through Libya, through Tunisia, through Sicily. He is wounded twice, shrapnel in the leg at Mareth, bullet through the shoulder at Catania. Both times he returns to his unit after recovery. He serves in the 9th Australian Division for 3 years, from Tobruck's siege through Italy's campaign. He will go home to Australia in late 1944, resume his dock worker life, marry, raise children, and live until 1997. In his final years, he will say that Alamein was the defining moment of his life, that nothing afterward compared to the terror and exhilaration of that October night. His story is one of 500,000 stories. 500,000 men served in the Eighth Army during the war. Each has story of fear, courage, suffering, survival, or death. The diversity of the Eighth Army's composition is often forgotten. British formations provided the backbone, regular army battalions, territorial divisions, tank regiments. But the army included Australians who brought aggressive independence to operations, New Zealanders whose courage at Takruna and El Alamein became legendary, Indians whose divisions, 4th Indian, 8th Indian, 10th Indian, fought with distinction across 3 continents, South Africans whose armored divisions, infantry brigades, and air squadrons contributed at every major battle, Poles who joined after their nation's destruction, fighting for freedom they would never fully achieve, Greeks who escaped their occupied homeland, Free French who refused surrender, Italians who, after 1943, fought against their former German allies. Even a Jewish brigade group formed from Palestinian Jewish volunteers seeking to fight Nazis directly. The Indian Army's contribution deserves particular emphasis. Over 300,000 Indian soldiers served in North Africa, Italy, and other Mediterranean theaters. They came from every region of India, every religion, every background. Sikhs from Punjab, Muslims from United Provinces, Hindus from Madras, Gurkhas from Nepal. They fought for Britain while India demanded independence from Britain. They fought fascism while experiencing colonialism. They earned 14 Victoria Crosses, hundreds of other decorations, and respect even from German opponents. Field Marshal Kesselring, commanding German forces in Italy, described Indian divisions as among the finest troops he faced. Yet after war, when British military histories were written, Indian contributions were often minimized or forgotten entirely. The story of Sepoy Kamal Ram illuminates this complexity. Ram served in the 8th Indian Division throughout Italian campaign. He fought at Cassino, at the Gothic Line, at Argenta Gap. He was 30 years old, from a village in Rajasthan, a farmer before the war. He did not particularly support British rule in India. He did not hate Germans or Italians. He fought because he was ordered to fight, because his family needed the military pay, because his village expected him to serve honorably. In April 1945, during the final offensive, his platoon was pinned down by German machine gun fire. Ram, without orders, charged the position alone, throwing grenades and firing his rifle. He killed the German crew, but was mortally wounded. His last words, according to witnesses, were in Rajasthani dialect. "Tell my family I did my duty." He received no decoration. His name appears in no histories, but he, and hundreds of thousands like him, made the Eighth Army possible. The Polish Second Corps represents another powerful story. These men had been captured by Soviets in September 1939, when Germany and Soviet Union divided Poland. They spent years in Soviet labor camps, survived near starvation, were released only after Germany invaded Soviet Union in June 1941. They made their way through Persia, Iraq, Palestine, and Egypt, forming military units from survivors. By 1943, Polish Second Corps numbered 50,000 men determined to fight Germans with special intensity, born from national destruction and personal suffering. They fought at Cassino, finally capturing the monastery in May 1944, after Allied forces had failed for 4 months. They fought through Italy to war's end, and in 1945, they learned their nation had been delivered from Nazi occupation to Soviet domination. They had fought for freedom Poland would not receive for 45 more years. The tank crew's experience was a particular kind of hell. British tank quality improved dramatically during war, from inadequate Crusaders and Valentines to effective Shermans and Churchills. But even best tanks were death traps when hit. A 75mm or 88mm shell penetrating armor created catastrophic internal explosion. Ammunition detonated, fuel ignited. Crew had seconds to escape through narrow hatches while fire consumed the interior. Tank crews developed dark humor about their vehicles. They called Shermans Ronsons after cigarette lighter, advertised as lighting first time, every time, because Shermans burned first time, every time when penetrated. Crews painted names on their tanks, developed superstitions about lucky commanders or cursed positions, and accepted that statistically their tank would eventually be hit, and they would be lucky to escape. Trooper Michael Carver, later Field Marshal Lord Carver, served as tank troop leader through North Africa and Italy. He described the peculiar intimacy of tank crews, 5 men in confined space for weeks at a time, sharing danger, depending absolutely on each other's competence. Driver who made wrong turn could drive into minefield, killing everyone. Gunner who missed target exposed crew to return fire. Loader who fumbled ammunition, reduced rate of fire. Commander who made poor tactical decision, endangered entire crew. The trust required was total. Many crews developed bonds stronger than family relationships. When tanks were hit and crew members killed, survivors mourned with intensity that shocked observers. These were not just comrades, but brothers in most essential sense. The artillery crew's war was different, less mobile, more mathematical, equally dangerous. British artillery in World War II was arguably finest in the world, accurate, responsive, devastating when massed. But operating artillery required skill, courage, and acceptance of German counter-battery fire. When British guns fired, German spotters located them. German artillery returned fire within minutes. British crews learned to fire missions, then displace immediately to avoid counterfire. The physical labor was immense, lifting shells weighing 40 to 90 pounds, operating breech mechanisms, moving guns repeatedly. The noise was deafening. Gun crews suffered permanent hearing loss. The danger was constant. German counter-battery fire, air attacks, and occasional ground assault on gun positions. Medical personnel, doctors, nurses, orderlies, stretcher bearers, experienced war through lens of human suffering. Field hospitals processed thousands of casualties during major battles. Surgeons operated continuously for 24 or 36 hours during peak casualty periods. They performed amputations without adequate anesthesia, treated wounds with limited supplies, made triage decisions about who could be saved and who could not. Nurses worked in conditions approaching medieval: canvas tents, inadequate lighting, summer heat or winter cold, constant flow of dying men. Stretcher bearers retrieved wounded under fire, often becoming casualties themselves. The psychological toll on medical personnel was enormous. Many developed what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, but was then called exhaustion or nerves. The class dynamics within the Eighth Army reflected broader British society. Officers came predominantly from upper middle and upper classes, educated at public schools and universities. Enlisted men came from working and lower middle classes, educated to age 14 or 16. This class divide was less rigid than in peacetime army, but never disappeared entirely. Good officers earned respect, regardless of class background. Poor officers were resented for their privilege. Some enlisted men saw the war as opportunity for social mobility, proving themselves, earning commissions from ranks, breaking class barriers. Others accepted traditional structure, but demanded that officers earn their authority through competence and courage. The tension between class tradition and meritocratic war shaped the Army's culture. By 1945, very few Eighth Army soldiers remained who had served since 1942. Casualties, rotations, transfers, and discharges had turned over the Army's personnel almost completely. Fewer than 15,000 men, 3% of total strength, served continuously from Alamein to Germany's surrender. These men were veterans in truest sense, survivors of 3 years' continuous combat, multiple wounds, psychological trauma that would haunt them for life. They formed tight-knit community within the larger army, recognizable by their ribbons, their bearing, their cynicism about new replacements' enthusiasm. They were the living memory of the Eighth Army's transformation from defeat to victory. In 1950s and 60s, as these men aged and raised families, they gathered at reunions to remember. The Eighth Army Association, Desert Rat Association, various divisional and regimental associations held annual meetings. Aging men, now in middle age, gathered to drink, share stories, remember dead comrades, and maintain connection to defining experience of their lives. They argued about battles, about Montgomery, about what the war meant. But they agreed on essentials. They had served in extraordinary formation during extraordinary time. They had done their duty despite fear. They had survived when many had not. For most of them, nothing in civilian life compared to intensity, purpose, and comradeship of their service. This was both blessing and curse. They had lived through history's greatest war in history's most famous army. Everything afterward was anticlimax. May 7th, 1945. Tunis, North Africa. Victory Parade. Churchill visits North Africa one final time to review the victorious Eighth Army, though by this date, most Eighth Army formations are scattered across Europe and much of the army has been disbanded or transferred. Still, representative units march through Tunis streets, armor, infantry, artillery, all wearing the Desert Rat insignia or other divisional badges earned in North Africa. Churchill watches from reviewing stand, cigar clenched in his teeth, tears streaming down his face. Whatever his criticisms of Montgomery's caution, whatever his frustrations with the Italian campaign's duration, he knows what he is witnessing. The army that saved Egypt, secured Suez, drove Rommel from Africa, and opened the path to invading Europe. Without this army's victories in 1942 and 43, Britain's strategic position would have been catastrophic. The old man, who has carried weight of empire and war for 5 years, weeps openly as soldiers march past. The immediate post-war years see rapid demobilization. The massive citizen army assembled during war dissolves within 18 months. Men return to civilian life, resume careers, start families, try to forget trauma of war. The Eighth Army shrinks from formation of hundreds of thousands to cadre strength, then effectively ceases to exist as unified entity. Various divisions and regiments maintain their identities and traditions. But The Eighth Army, as Montgomery created it, as soldiers remember it, exists only in memory and history. By 1947, British Army in Middle East has been reorganized multiple times. The Eighth Army's number designation is retained, but its character is gone. The desert rat emblem, however, becomes permanent symbol of British military heritage. The jerboa, a small desert jumping rodent, had been 7th Armored Division's insignia since 1940. During war, it became associated more broadly with all forces fighting in North Africa, and specifically with Montgomery's Eighth Army. After war, it remains a powerful symbol recognized by British public. Veterans wear desert rat badges at reunions. Regimental museums display desert rat memorabilia. The image appears in books, films, and documentaries about the North African campaign. The jerboa becomes shorthand for British desert warfare, for Montgomery's victories, for the transformation from defeat to triumph. 1961 brings first major controversy over Eighth Army's legacy. British military planners propose reforms that would merge or disband historic regiments, including some that served in Eighth Army. Veterans mobilize in protest, arguing that regimental traditions matter, that heritage has value, that history should be preserved. The protests partially succeed. Some regiments are saved, others are merged but retain historical connections. The controversy reveals depth of feeling veterans maintain about their service. For them, the Eighth Army is not abstract historical formation, but personal identity, source of pride, connection to most meaningful period of their lives. The Falklands War in 1982 and Gulf War in 1991 provide unexpected opportunities for desert rat legacy to continue. 7th Armored Brigade, descendant of original 7th Armored Division, deploys to both conflicts wearing the desert rat insignia. In Gulf War particularly, fighting in desert terrain against armored opponent recalls North African campaigns. British press makes explicit connection. Desert rats return to desert warfare 50 years later. Veterans of World War II watch with complex emotions as new generation fights in same terrain, wearing same insignia, upholding same traditions. Some are proud, some are troubled by romanticization of warfare. All feel connection spanning 5 decades. The 2000th decade brings last major gatherings of 8th Army veterans. By 2005, surviving veterans are in their 80s and 90s. Annual reunions shrink as age and death take toll. The meetings become increasingly poignant. Dozens where once there were hundreds, wheelchairs where once there were marching formations, frail elderly men where once there were young warriors. They gather to remember, to honor dead comrades, to maintain connections as their generation fades. The stories they tell have been refined over 60 years, funnier, cleaner, more noble than reality. But the emotions are genuine. These men shared something unrepeatable, something that defines them still. 2012, final major 8th Army reunion. Fewer than 20 veterans attend, most requiring assistance to walk. They gather at Regimental Museum, surrounded by displays of equipment they once used. Tanks, uniforms, weapons, all now artifacts in glass cases. They look at photographs of themselves as young men, lean, hard, confident, and struggle to reconcile those images with their current frailty. They sign guest book, knowing this is likely last time they will gather. A journalist interviewing them asks if the 8th Army's sacrifices were worth it, if defeating fascism justified the cost. The veterans look at him with something between pity and contempt. "We had no choice," one says finally. "The war had to be fought. We did our duty, that's all." The historical assessment continues to evolve. Early histories, written in 1950s and 60s, lionized Montgomery and portrayed 8th Army as unstoppable force. Revisionist histories in 1970s and 80s criticized Montgomery's caution and questioned whether Italian campaign achieved sufficient strategic value. Recent histories, with access to German and Italian archives, provide more balanced assessment. 8th Army was very good force that fought successful campaigns under difficult conditions, but was neither invincible nor perfectly commanded. The truth, as usually happens, lies between hagiography and criticism. The strategic accomplishment is undeniable when measured objectively. The Eighth Army, across 3 years, fought from Egypt to Austria, covering 3,000 miles, conducting dozens of major operations, defeating multiple enemy armies, securing critical strategic objectives. It protected Suez Canal and Middle Eastern oil fields. It cleared North Africa of Axis forces. It invaded Europe through Sicily and Italy. It tied down significant German forces that could not reinforce more critical theaters. These achievements were real, substantial, and necessary for Allied victory. Without them, the war would have lasted longer, cost more lives, and possibly ended differently. But the human cost was enormous. 224,000 British and Commonwealth casualties in Eighth Army operations from 1942 to 1945, over 60,000 killed, 130,000 wounded, 34,000 missing or captured. Behind each number is story. Family destroyed by loss, life truncated by death, body maimed by wounds, mind damaged by trauma. The Eighth Army's victories were purchased with blood, pain, and grief on scale difficult to comprehend. Every mile advanced, every town captured, every battle won required sacrifice measured in thousands of individual tragedies. The counterfactual questions never cease. Could different strategy have achieved same results with fewer casualties? Could more aggressive pursuit after Alamein have shortened North African campaign? Could bypassing Italy entirely in favor of earlier Normandy invasion have ended war faster? These questions have no definitive answers because history does not permit replaying events with different choices. But they must be asked because understanding what was achieved requires understanding what alternatives existed and what costs different choices might have entailed. The soldiers themselves rarely engage with these strategic debates. For them, the Eighth Army means something simpler and more profound: comradeship under extreme stress, survival against odds, youth spent in extraordinary circumstances, lives shaped by shared trauma and triumph. They do not claim they were perfect soldiers, or that their commanders were tactical geniuses, or that every decision was correct. They claim something more modest and more important. They did their duty when their nation and world needed them. They fought fascism when its defeat was not assured. They endured hardship, overcame fear, and persevered through years of warfare. They earned their pride. 2025, 83 years after Alamein. Perhaps a dozen Eighth Army veterans survive worldwide, all over 100 years old. In museums and archives, their testimony is preserved. Oral histories, written memoirs, letters, and diaries. The desert rat insignia remains a recognizable symbol. Annual commemorations still occur, though attended by descendants rather than veterans. The Eighth Army's place in history is secure. It saved British strategic position in Middle East, defeated Rommel, demonstrated that British forces could defeat Germans, and maintained British military prestige during war's darkest years. But perhaps the deepest legacy is intangible. Proof that military formations can transform, that doctrine and training matter, that leadership at all levels determines outcomes, that diverse groups can forge common identity, that citizen soldiers can become effective warriors. The Eighth Army entered war expecting defeat and left it having achieved the victory. That transformation, that journey from despair to confidence, from failure to success, from retreat to advance, that is the story future generations should remember. Not because the Eighth Army was perfect, not because every decision was correct, but because it demonstrated human capacity for adaptation, learning, and ultimate triumph over adversity. The last desert rats will soon be gone. The living memory will fade, but the legacy endures, in museums displaying artifacts, in histories recording battles, in commemorations honoring sacrifice, in military traditions preserving lessons learned. The Eighth Army, which nobody wanted in August 1942, which became the army everyone celebrated by May 1943, which fought largely forgotten campaigns through 1944 and 45, which contributed decisively to Allied victory. That army earned its place in history, not through propaganda or myth, not through exaggeration or hagiography, but through 3 years of hard fighting, intelligent adaptation, sustained courage, and ultimate success. That is legacy enough. That is what the last desert rats leave behind. Proof that ordinary people, properly led and prepared, can achieve extraordinary things. The men are fading. The memory remains. The legacy endures.